实验律师还是可以先暂时把它取消。不晓得。
没有，我们可以视而不知，视而不见是 OK 的，但是
因为那个原则就是那个地上把环境弄干净就好。
好，这 OK 的，这一定的，因为怕引起误会，因为上面。好，对。
吃饭。
对。算了，还是有点高点的16，没有等等比你好，因为我刚刚上个课时因为需要没有嘛，因为那个需要你进入的班。16。
最好的时光会累。好，让我看了一下，还要延迟大概20秒。哦，对，会有人坐下来。延迟正常的。因为你在多大出这种常会寻找。
这个通电一直没有看过真面。好，但是白天先忙完会
大多数秩序。 然后这样走孩子，你要脚步哦。更扯这个。现场直播，那我干嘛还来？我就看现场直播就好了。现场可以有一些对话哦。然后我们用 LINE 视讯。
参与的朋友，大家好，我们活动大约在3分钟之后会开始，那大家可以先就坐。如果需要上洗手间的，可以在这个楼层的到底走到底的位置。
那个东西在你，就如果你，就他就在 YouTube 上面他们的介绍，他就
大家早安。活动即将要开始了。那我是今天的主持人，我是黑潮海洋之跟我是欧阳。 那很欢迎大家从远道而来，从台湾各个地方可能过来参加海洋哺乳类动物圈养议题的一个国际研讨会。那在会前，我有几件事情可以先提醒一下，包括场内需要注意的事情。我的部分，厕所和茶水间在我们出去的1楼，这个地下室的楼层都有。那同样的位置在1楼的地方也有。那有热水，还有饼干。那饼干的部分我们也有准备素食。去外面的外面的桌子，还有楼上的区域都有茶点，大家可以饿的时候补充一点热量。还有我们非常贴心的呢，准备了一些那个手冲的咖啡。如果大家记的话如果想要到楼上休息的时间，我们会有一个伙伴志工，他是在花莲开咖啡店的，所以他可以为您现冲购买挂耳包之后，非常及时的可以提神那当然，当大家从楼上报道下来，看到很多的义卖区还有议题的部分的大家都可以上去了解一下。黑潮海洋文教基金会和台湾动物社会研究会关注的议题是2个主办单位。在关注的议题，在上面桌上都有放我们的 DM， 还有说明。当然也有明信片，联署的明信片是主要针对于反圈养的。那欢迎大家上去了解一下，填写你的名字的话，夹在那里，我们都可以为你寄送到教育部去。缺笔记本的、缺餐具的楼上都有，义卖区都有卖我们都是 NGO 组织，也欢迎大家多了解之后，用义卖的方式支持我们继续下去。还有包括提问单刚刚在报可能我忘记发了，所以如果你想要有任何的问题，想要在最后的地方提问的话，也可以上面我们希望先收集到大家的问题，在楼上的报道处有一个空白的纸，上面有盖黑潮的那个部分是我们的提问单，你也可以去商业索取之后写下来。交给我们的工作人员都可以。在最后，我们会帮你累积了问题之后，提问给在综合讨论的时候的那个时段会提供给讲者。开机的部分大家如果有拿到口译机，它的操作非常的容易，只要在侧边的开关打开之后，就可以去调整音量。那确认你的 channel 频道是0不要动到它。如果是 channel 是0的话，你就会听到翻译口译的部分。还有一个部分就是说时间的提醒，我们会每一场活动我们都会有一个工作人员在15分钟即将倒数15分钟的时候会举牌在后面在倒数5分钟的时候，所以大家不用太惊慌所以会有一个朋友，也许是站在最后面的位置，所以会举牌提醒大家时间的部分。那活动即将开始了，请大家手机的部分请关到静音。那这个活动是由黑潮台湾动物社会研究会所共同主办。那我想现在邀请黑潮的执行长张慧君小姐为大家说几句话。
各位朋友，大家早安。那么多的朋友一起到现场来，跟我们一起关心海洋哺乳类的动物福利的议题那今天的这一场国际研讨会呢，是由黑潮海洋文教基金会跟台湾动物社会研究会共同的合办。那有这样的一个机会，其实要感谢浩然基金会他们在今年的支持，那让我们可以在年初的时候到英国的鲸豚保育组织去做了一次的参访跟交流。那同时呢，我们也在这个圈养议题上面有了一些联系的部分那也促成了今天的这一场国际研讨会。这场的来宾呢，有来自美国的 Dr.Naomi。那还有Mr. David Neale， 来自英国的 Neale。其实，在美国跟英国的这2个国家呢，其实他们的动物议题是很早就被讨论的，所以他们对于在动物的福利的法令上面的这些进步呢，也是我们值得借鉴的部分。那今天其实就很难得的可以邀请他们到现场跟大家经验那对于我们未来的动物议题该怎么样的走呢？这个是很重要的一个帮助那另外呢，我们又来自香港的这个洪家耀博士 Dr. Hong， 以及呢也是土居一家的组织。 讲呢，他们也会从白海豚的野外保育的研究，那谈到说议题的行动怎么样的串联跟开始吼。那在香港呢，是在对于香港海洋公园的这边的经验吼，那也非常的重一线的经验。那另外呢，我们还有一位来自中国大陆的胡春梅研究员。春梅的这个在中国在做这个动物议题的这个经验也是非常重要，那提供了我们在看中国问题的这个脉络的一个窗。其实我想今天大家到这边，也许带着不一样的认识的程度哈，或者是不一样的想法来到这边要做一个交流，那我觉得都很好哈。就是说，我想多一个人来参与这样的一个研讨会，那我们就多一个改变的机会。所以呢，我想今天大家就是可以把握时间哈，因为我们议程非常的紧凑，那有点像一个大补帖一样哈，所以休息的时间有点短，但是我想在这个场合里面呢，我们可以做非常充分的一个沟通和对话。那也请大家就是今天呢，就是把握对话的时间哈。好，谢谢。
第一场演讲是主题是圈养鲸类的动物福利，我们邀请到了我们的主持人伟丽，是黑潮的常务董事。
Good morning, everyone, and our distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm Cai Wei. I'm now serving as the Managing Director of Rochelle Ocean Education Foundation, and welcome to this conference. About 20 years ago, I was lucky to working with Dr. Ye Lisen of this Dr. Zhou Lianxiang on conservation of Taiwan cetacean. And Dr. Ye Lisen was the pioneer in Taiwan's Animal Protection Act at that time. So both projects were pioneering in Taiwan at that time. And I was wondering if these two issues will intersect someday. And today I'm more than happy to see all of you here. And thanks each of you to make this conference possible. And today, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Naomi. She had been working with the wild orca population in British Columbia while she's doing her PhD thesis. So with this background and her experience in Humane Society of the United States, focus on the protection, especially for the biosonar issue, human-made noise underwater in the United States and internationally for the past decade. In recent years, she's working with Animal Welfare Institute in Washington, D.C., promoting the policy, for example, like Orca Bill or other welfare issue of captive cetaceans and other marine mammals. And today is our greatest honor and privilege to have her sharing with us her experience in the United States and the world about captive cetaceans welfare. And let's welcome Dr. Naomi Rose.
So, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for attending this workshop. I'm going to give you some background on marine mammals in captivity. I'm going to talk about their ecology in the wild so you can understand better why having them in captivity is a problem. I'm then going to talk about some various in fact, aspects of their conditions in captivity that I feel make it difficult for them to thrive. It's not that they can't survive, but they cannot thrive when they are in captivity. And then I'm going to talk about the trade in these animals. This is not just a welfare problem, it is also a conservation problem. So the typical marine mammal are these 4 species, I can count, 5 species of cetaceans. All of the pinnipeds are often held in captivity. The seals, sea lions, and walruses, collectively known as pinnipeds, they are often held in captivity. And then our marine mammals, they are considered marine mammals because of their ecology. They must live in the marine environment. Polar bears, manatees, sea otters, also dugongs, are sometimes held in captivity. So of the whales, dolphins, and porpoises, known as cetaceans, we have the baleen whales. These are the whales that do not have teeth. They have baleen, which is a material that's the same as your fingernails, and they use this to filter feed, to take small animals, small crustaceans, small fish, out of the water and swallow everything all at once. Toothed whales, which are in all of these different families. And if you notice, you've got 2 at the bottom there, beaked whales and river dolphins. Most people haven't heard of those. How many of you have heard of beaked whales or river dolphins? A few, well. So most people don't know about these species. It's because, in fact, they aren't held in captivity very often. In fact, I think only a handful, 4 or 5 river dolphins have ever been successfully held in captivity. Beaked whales cannot survive in captivity at all. So most are belugas, dolphins, and some porpoises. So again, the reason baleen whales are not held in captivity is because of their size. They simply grow too large. And also because of the way they feed, it would be very, from a care perspective, to provide them with food in a way that they could eat because of their filter feeding. So even the smallest baleen whale, which is the beaked whale, is quite large when it's full grown. So it's just not possible to keep them in captivity. So really what we're looking at, whales, dolphins, porpoises, those are the ones that we're going to see in captivity. The most common family that is held in captivity is the family Delphinidae, or dolphins. And the most common species that's held in captivity is the bottlenose dolphin. This is a coast. They are seen offshore. There's a whole different group of animals that are often seen offshore, but we don't know as much about those bottlenose. The bottlenose we know most about are coastal animals. They are often found in shallow water. They are social, but they live in what are known as fissions. They come together, they break apart, they come together again. Within those groups, there might be friendships or family groups that are very stable, but on a daily basis, you will see dolphins with different animals over the course of the day. And as a result, they seem to adapt better to captivity. So this is going to find, for example, all three of the facilities here in Taiwan have had or currently have bottlenose dolphins. But they are often found in shallow water, so they seem to adapt better to tanks. And because they are not as family, they seem to do better in captivity. And when I say better, I don't mean well. I feel that they do not thrive. I am very convinced that no cetacean can thrive in captivity. But just by the data, you can see that they do better when they are in small tanks. Another species that's found in captivity is the killer whale, or orca. We believe now that there are 7 in China, in mainland China. We have 25 in the United States, and there are about as many again, about 25, 26, 27 in other countries, right? As far as we are aware, 57 orcas in captivity in the whole world. So it's not a large population in captivity in the whole world. The whale in the upper left-hand picture is Keiko, the whale that was in the movie Free Willy. So this was when he was released back into his home water. But there's a yellow thing on his dorsal fin. This was a tag that allowed him to be monitored at all times. But you can also see that this is the way orcas typically live, and those are family groups. Unlike the bottlenose dolphin, orcas are very tightly bonded to family, and this is one of the reasons they do not adapt well at all. See, far worse in captivity than bottlenose dolphins do. And the fact that Russia is now capturing them again and selling them to China is a great concern. The false killer whale is also a common species, particularly here in Asia. They are as acrobatic as the other dolphins, so they can be taught to do that are very entertaining. They are also very socially bonded, but they're slightly larger. They're not as big as orcas, but they are bigger than bottlenose dolphins. So again, they, in my opinion, do not thrive in captivity. All of the larger dolphins, just size alone, just the space that they are given them, and I'll talk about that a bit more. And then another common species you will find, we have several of them in the United States, and they're also found in other countries, is the white-sided dolphin. These are open ocean dolphins. They are not coastal in their distribution. They are found out in the open ocean in pelagic waters, and this makes it difficult for them to do a confined, shallow space. They are, however, very acrobatic. They, as you can see, jump out of the water very easily, and so they are able to perform a lot of acrobatic tricks, which make them very entertaining when they are in captivity. And then there is one species that is not a dolphin that is very commonly found in captivity, which is a monodontid. Monodontid means one tooth. And if you are familiar with the narwhal, you can understand why they're called that. The narwhal is the closest relative to the beluga whale, and it has that long tusk. It's the unicorn whale. Well, the beluga whale, which doesn't look like a narwhal at all, is actually very closely related to the narwhal. The picture, I think, is really, really great to show this. As you can see, they have a neck. You know, they have the ability to turn their head and to bend their head. And that is actually very unusual. If you see most dolphins, they don't have a neck. They can't turn their head. They have to turn their whole body to turn their head. Their cervical vertebrae, the vertebrae in their neck, are fused. So, these animals have a neck, and this makes them very appealing. I mean, just looking at that photograph, you can sort of see why they're so appealing. They are very cute, and people really like them for this reason. But they're also Arctic in their distribution. They're found in cold water. And so when they are put into captivity, it's very difficult to provide for them. It's very difficult to accommodate them. In fact, at the National Museum in Bindung, where we visited a few days ago, the temperature, both in the air and in the water, is not very cold. So these animals are basically living in activity that is too warm for them. And this is a problem from a welfare perspective. Pinnipeds, these are the seals, sea lions, and walruses. So there are a lot of them in captivity. There's several of them here in Taiwan. So we have California sea lions are the most commonly held species globally. They are found in the Pacific Ocean off the coast, but there are several of them here in Taiwan. They are very agile on land. They are very acrobatic in water, and they are very intelligent. Probably not quite as smart as dolphins, but they are very smart, and they can be taught a lot of tricks. And so they're very common and very popular in dolphinariums. Unfortunately, they're often made to portray, and this to me is not a very educational message. They're always in comedies. They're always portrayed as the stupid one and the smart one, or some sort of comedy that I don't think is very educational. And I think it is a big problem that this extremely intelligent and social animal is being portrayed in a way that isn't correct biologically. Other sea lions that are found in captivity, and you can sort of see here it's one of the big differences between the two groups. Sea lions have external ears. Seals do not. They have ears, and their hearing is very good, but you'll see in a photograph in a moment that they have no external ear. They just have a hole in the side of their head. It's one of the ways you can tell the difference. Another way is they can rotate their hind flippers forward, so they are very agile on land. Seals, true seals, can't do that. Their hips are not capable of rotating forward, and so they are very awkward on land. This is the last kind of sea lion. It's a fur seal. The reason they're called fur seals is because they have this very thick fur on their shoulders, and it made them, they were killed and hunted for fur. And the true seals, the most common species you'll see is the harbor seal, and you see here that they cannot rotate their hind flippers forward. They're very awkward on land. They usually aren't taught to do any tricks. They usually aren't used in performances. You can also see the hole in the side of their head, which is their ear. They do hear perfectly well, but they don't have any external. The gray seal is found fairly typically in captivity in Europe. They're found very frequently there. The elephant seal is almost never found in captivity, and the reason is simply, again, their size. This animal is very, very large. This is a male, and he can be 2 tons. So this is an extremely large animal, and so they're not very commonly found. It's also a very large animal, and yet is frequently found in captivity, particularly when a facility has a polar exhibit. So I believe there are some walruses in China, yes, and we do have some in the United States. The reason they're in their own family biologically is because they share characteristics with both the seals and the sea lions. They can rotate their hind flippers external ears. They just have the pinhole in the side of their head. The tusks are both males and females, and they use them for foraging. And this is one of the reasons why they don't belong in captivity. When they forage, they use their tusks to dig in the substrate. They dig their prey up with their tusks. When they try to do that in a tank, they're digging in concrete good for their teeth, and they often break their teeth in captivity. So, in fact, many institutions, many facilities remove the tusks entirely. They just hold their teeth, basically, which is, in my opinion, if you have to mutilate the animal to prevent them from doing self-harm, then they don't belong in captivity. And then, there is a manatee at Ocean Park. It is a West African manatee. I don't believe there's any polar bears or sea otters in Taiwan, but they are commonly held in other facilities. Polar bears in particular are found fairly frequently in captivity. And the problem is that although they are simply bears and sea otters, they are required to be in the marine environment to be healthy. And so what you end up having is a polar animal, for instance with the polar bear, a polar animal that is, again, held in temperatures that are too warm for it. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. Just like the walrus, just like the beluga, they are often held in conditions that are too warm for them. The manatee occupies captivity because it is a vegetarian. It is an herbivore. And so it is easier to maintain. It's not as high maintenance because you don't have to find good quality fish. You just have to feed it fresh vegetables, and it can do well in captivity. So I've actually seen several manatee exhibits where the animals are rescued from trees or strandings, and I have rhythm. Anyway, so I've actually seen manatee exhibits where the animals are rescued from strandings and They cannot be. In those circumstances, I've actually felt that they are being maintained in better conditions than some pinnipeds or cetaceans. I'm now going to explain to you the 4 reasons why I feel cetaceans, I'm now going to focus for a bit on cetaceans, cannot thrive in captivity. These are 4 characteristics that they all have, all the species, even the bottlenose dolphin, which is perhaps the best adapted, why I feel that they do not belong in captivity. First one, and the most important one, is space. All cetaceans are wide-ranging predators. Even when they feed just on fish, they are hunters. That's their nature. And so when you put them in a small space, they cannot hunt, and they cannot move the distances they evolved to move. This becomes a very serious welfare problem. So you have a situation like this one, where they are in a restricted space, right? They are, this is a facility in the Dominican Republic. It's a very typical size for a facility there, for a facility in almost any country. What you see is there were 5 dolphins in this enclosure at the time. Remember what I said about how they are wide-ranging predators. Even the smallest bottlenose dolphin habitat, home range, is about, at least 30 to 50 square kilometers. That's the smallest. Most of them are hundreds of square kilometers. Orcas, thousands of square kilometers is where they live. So to restrict them to this, you wouldn't even want to live in that day in and day out, would you? I mean, it's not a space that is adequate for us, and we aren't as far-ranging as this ocean predator. So basically the way I look at it is, and I don't know how it is in Taiwan, but in the United States, if we keep our dogs in a kennel all the time, it's not going to take them out for a walk. You have to allow them to run every once in a while. This is a domesticated animal that we, live with. This is a kennel. And we're forcing a wild animal that ranges very widely to live in this kennel. It's not humane. This is an orca that lives in the U.S. This is a legal U.S. facility. So please do a role model. Our conditions, our standards are poor. Right? Our legal standards are poor. So this orca, her name is Lolita. Some of you may be familiar with her. This is her world. And it has been her world for 45 years. Now some people say, oh, well, she survived there for 45 years. It must be okay. I lived with her named Hugo, who died many years ago. This enclosure was too much for him. He couldn't survive in it, and he died. She just happens to be very strong. Other whales have died in this tank. Other dolphins, you can see that she has some dolphins with her. These are Pacific white-sided dolphins, the ones I showed you in the previous picture. They have lived and died in this tank. So Lolita is a strong whale does not mean this tank is okay. Right? When she is vertical in the water, her tail touches the bottom. It is as deep as she is long. And this is a species that can dive up to 500, 600 feet, or that would be 200, 250 meters, right? And she has depth in that tank that's only as deep as she is long. This is in China. These are 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 belugas that are being held in a fairly small space. This is bigger than it looks. I mean, there's some over here and somewhere, but notice this is the wall here. This is a holding tank. Holding tanks are often much, much smaller than the performance area, and it is where the animals spend most of their time. They are only allowed out into the performance area for the performance. They don't live in the performance area all the time in most facilities. So even when the performance tank looks bigger to you, just remember they don't actually have free access to that larger space. They are often with a gate, behind a gate, in these smaller spaces. So it always is a good idea to try to see behind the performance area. Look behind the stage, and you'll see that there are smaller tanks. And that is actually where the animals tend to spend most of their time. And I really can't emphasize enough how a wide-ranging predator suffers when it is in fact confined. How many of you have seen a tiger pacing back and forth in front of the bars of its cage at a zoo? How many of you have seen a polar bear doing the same, just pacing back and forth and back and forth? That is called a stereotypy. It is a neurotic, repetitive, non-functional behavior. And anytime you see something like that, it's because this wide-ranging predator needs involved in a very large space, very large home territory. And when it is denied that, it will try to compensate by behaving very neurotically. And that is not healthy. And again, if that's what you force the animal to do, then you shouldn't be confining it in the first place. To me, these are very obvious sort of ecological, biological conclusions. The animal to do something unnatural. If you have to mutilate the animal to keep it from harming itself, like pulling the tusks of walruses, then there's something wrong with you keeping it in captivity in the first place. This is the second aspect of these animals that make them unsuitable. They are very social. And in some cases, they are extremely complex in their sociality. Social environment when they are in captivity. So you get a situation like this. This is in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, where there are only 2 dolphins held in this enclosure. Somebody pointed out to me that this looks like it's a natural lagoon. This looks like sand. It is. This is actually a natural coastal bit of land that they have enclosed in a wall. And then there's the ocean. The dolphins do not jump over this wall. We don't know. Dolphins tend not to jump over nets when they're captured. They tend not to jump over nets when they're caught in a fishery bycatch situation. They tend not to jump over walls when they're held in an enclosure like this where there's the ocean on the other side. It's probably because when you think about it, in the open ocean, even in coastal environments, there are no barriers like that. A coral reef is below the surface. Right? The most solid barrier they're going to encounter in nature is a continent or an island. Of course, they don't jump over those, they swim around them. Right? So they do not encounter anything where they can't just swim over or swim around. So jumping over something to get to the other side is not a concept these animals seem to understand in nature. I don't really know much more about it than that. It makes sense to me just using common sense, but in fact we don't really know why they don't jump over things. So this wall might as well be, 100 feet high as far as the dolphins are concerned. They simply don't think of jumping over it. But unfortunately, we like to think when we see, I'll use the National Museum as an example. There are 3 belugas. There's 3 belugas like each other. They get along, but they're friends. But the fact is, in captivity, very often, because of these small social groups that they're held in, belugas are often found in a group of 1,000. So now you've got these 3 belugas in the National Museum. What if they don't like each other? What if they actually aren't friends? What if they actually don't get along? Well, what they'll do is they'll sort of keep themselves separate from each other as best they can, but the space is limited, get away from each other. So when we see this, we like to think these 2 dolphins are friends, but the fact is they are being forced into proximity to each other through being confined in this lagoon. And if they don't actually like each other, that's going to be a constant source of stress to them. And there has been a paper showing that 1 dolphin, at least that we know of, died from social stress. She was constantly bullied by the other dolphins in her facility. Bullying, they tried to keep her separate from them, but they couldn't quite manage it because the space was limited. She ended up developing a series of health problems, including ulcers, and eventually died. So again, we like to think that these dolphins are friends, but the fact is they might not actually like each other, but they are sort of like, a lot of you are students, they're like dorm roommates that don't actually get along. And think about how stressful it is when you get along, you cope. You have to because you live in a room together and the administration won't give you another room. But it can be very stressful, and that is what can happen here. Now, sometimes they do get along, but I'm just saying, if they don't, they have no options. This is a situation in China where we have 2 belugas in a very small space again. Again, belugas often are found in groups of more than 1,000. It's like living in a village. You have friends, you have enemies. You don't hang out with your enemies. You make sure that you don't hang out with your enemies, even though you both live in a small village. So when there's just 2 of you, and what if one of them is your enemy? It's stressful. Interestingly, whales, dolphins, and porpoises in captivity are frequently kept in these extremely barren tanks that look a lot like hotel swimming pools. When, for example, a manatee or even a harbor seal can be held in a tank that looks like it's got some texture to it. It looks like it has rocks or logs or vegetation. So why is that? It's primarily because these are predators, they're eating fish, and they produce a lot of waste. So to keep the enclosure hygienic, sanitary, it requires keeping it fairly barren. Even putting them into sea pens, which I think sea pens are better than tanks acoustically in terms of the fact that it's natural seawater. So I'm actually more supportive of sea pens than I am of tanks. However, sea pens can be a big problem too. They have to be located in an appropriate place. This particular sea pen, these are the pens right here, see them? And notice again, these are just docks that the trainers walk on. Why don't the dogs, whoop, they're free. Why don't they do that? Again, they don't seem to know they can do that. And again, we don't know too much about that. But notice all of this. This is just runoff, right? It's just when it rains, right? It all just runs into the water, and then it goes around right into the dolphin enclosures. So if you have it in a bad location, where water flow is poor, or runoff is high, or, for example, by a few hundred meters from a sewage outfall. That happened in Mexico. They built a sea pen that was only a few hundred meters down current from a sewage outfall. There was a very bad storm in Mexico, and 3 of the dolphins died right afterwards because the enclosure became completely contaminated with the sewage outflow in the storm. So location is everything. If you're going to have a sea pen, you have to locate it. This is actually the older version of my talk. I'm sorry, I actually had a more recent version of it. I'm almost the extra slides. So this is an enclosure in Malta. So this is a facility in the European country. This is just, the water's brown, right? So this is not an appropriate enclosure. This is a pinniped enclosure, by the way. This is for seals and sea lions, not for dolphins. And environmental enrichment can be very, very lacking in a dolphin or a whale enclosure. This is in Canada, in Marineland of Canada. This is a killer whale named Kiska. She's all alone. She doesn't even have dolphins for companionship. She has absolutely no environmental enrichment. It's just a big blue pool, and it is pretty big, comparatively speaking. It's much bigger than Lolita's tank, for example. But what you see her doing here is she is just logging. We call it logging. It's like being like a log. You're just hanging in the water, doing nothing. This is an extremely unusual behavior for killer whales. They do it in the wild, but for only 2 or 3 or 4 minutes at a time at most. And at the very least, this is a problem for her health in terms of exercise. She's not getting enough exercise, right? But the reason she's doing it is she is completely alone and she has no enrichment in this enclosure. Now, interestingly, at the National Museum, the 3 belugas there are given toys. And they do engage with those toys. That is enrichment. It's important to give them something to do between the shows. Put them in a very barren enclosure. You've put them in a tank that has no features, no variety, no stimulation. So you need to provide it. It's very important to give them something to do in between training and in between shows. And finally, the fourth problem, the fourth characteristic of these animals that makes them completely unsuited to being confined is they are predators. They are a wide variety of natural behaviors. They're very complex in their behavioral interactions with each other and with their prey. Orcas in particular have all cetaceans have all sorts of foraging methods. Bottlenose dolphins forage differently depending on their prey species. This is culture. Cetaceans have culture. They have different languages, they have different foraging techniques. These are taught, and they pass them down through the generations, and they are different depending on their local habitat. So they are not hardwired to be a certain way. They have a lot of behavioral flexibility, and they teach their offspring and other members of their social group these behaviors, and that is culture. And that is taken away from them in captivity. In fact, in a way, you could look at the captive environment as a separate culture, and it's not a very healthy one. So, this is earlier in the talk that I was going to show you a comparison with polar bears in captivity versus in the wild. So these are polar bears in the wild, right? They are supremely adapted to live in the Arctic environment. They are actually more at risk of overheating than of freezing because they are so well insulated against the cold. They have a very thick blubber layer. Their fur actually absorbs solar heat. And in fact, if they cold winter's day, they are more at risk of overheating than of freezing. So this is a species that you think you can put in captivity? I don't think so. Because this is what happens. Right? They cope. Right? This is a polar bear in the Midwest of the United States, so it's cold in the winter, but it gets very hot in the summer. And this is what happens. They actually choose not to eat. They stop eating. The blubber layer becomes thinner, just so they can cope with the heat. Right? So again, if you are forcing the species you're maintaining in a zoo or an aquarium to behave abnormally, behave unnaturally, or starve itself just to not overheat, you shouldn't have it in captivity in the first place. And in fact, in the United States, the zoo community is considering this. The display of polar bears is becoming because of this. There are a number of zoo professionals who now feel it is inappropriate to maintain polar bears in captivity. They are too wide-ranging, they often develop stereotypies, and because they're very adapted to the polar environment, keeping them in a climate that is inappropriate can cause very serious welfare problems. Orcas, top marine predator. Nothing is higher in the wild. Several of them forage, hunt other marine mammals. This is a Dahl's porpoise that this orca has just knocked right out of the water. It's actually airborne, it's flying. This is a situation in Argentina where the orcas pull baby sea lions off of the beach. So they actually beach themselves. This whale is actually on the sand and pull a very hazardous foraging technique. They can, in fact, strand themselves accidentally. So it is very, very dangerous and yet highly beneficial. So there's high risk, high return. Right? So they teach their offspring how to do this. And that is the most dangerous period of all, when the young whales are learning this technique. They can, in fact, die as a result of learning this technique. This is the way it is in the wild. This is the way it is. Whenever you see a cetacean with its head up and its mouth open like that, mouth open, you will see cetaceans with their heads up all the time. It's called spy hopping, and they are looking around. They have very good eyesight, below and above the water. So when you see any cetacean with its head up out of the water and its mouth is closed, that's probably in the wild. When you see a cetacean with its head up and its mouth open, then you're seeing a whale in captivity. It doesn't matter what the picture looks like. It might look like it because they don't do this. Why? Why don't they ever do this in the wild? Where does food come from in the wild? It comes from the water, fish, other mammals, right? Where does food come from in captivity? It comes from the sky. Dead things drop from the sky. That is not natural. This is not a natural posture at all. So when you train your whale or your dolphin, they come to the edge of the pool and they station. That's actually completely unnatural. That posture of being vertical in the water, head up, mouth open, is not normal. And it is actually a problem we know for pinnipeds. It's probably a problem for cetaceans because their eyes are always above the surface and they're always looking at the sky because that's where food comes from. They actually develop eye problems. The overexposure to the sun, to UV light, actually causes food in a completely unnatural place. That orientation to the sky is not normal. So they actually develop eye problems. So you've got fish-eating orcas as well. That's more typical. Only a few of the populations hunt marine mammals. So you've got these orcas are actually hunting herring in this case. This is in Norway. Very sophisticated hunting techniques. They don't just randomly eat these fish. They herd and ball, and then they cooperatively take turns feeding on those fish. And yet, in captivity, fish just come from the sky. Dead ones. And again, look at it from a behavioral point of view in terms of boredom. This is a hunter. This is something they spend a lot of time doing. Public display facilities will often portray this as like hard work that they take away as a benefit. You don't have to work so hard to be alive in perspective of having a job. Don't you like having a job? I mean, sometimes your job is boring or stressful. But if you have a job, like I have a job I'm actually really happy with, it's a challenge, it involves me, it engages me. It's my career, it's my living. And if I didn't have a job, I'd be unemployed. Do you want to be unemployed? You don't want to be unemployed, right? It's often stressful and certainly can be boring. We've taken away their careers. It's their job to hunt for fish. It's their job to hunt for other mammals. Right? As young dolphins or whales, it's their job to learn how to hunt. We take that away from them in captivity, and they actually get bored. Boredom can kill. Really severe boredom can cause physical problems, and it can kill. Right? So when we take away their job, orcas in particular have dental problems. Bottlenose dolphins and belugas do not so much suffer from this problem, but it is a very big one for orcas. And so the 7 whales in China may already have some serious problems with this. This is a resident killer whale in the region I studied these animals. So this is in the Pacific Northwest of the United States and Canada. They're very large, conical, serious weapons. Okay? They can rip and shred another marine mammal or a fish, a big fish, and nothing. Flat. Okay? That is typical. This is a dead animal. That's why it looks so horrible. It's decaying. It's decomposing. This is a dead animal that was found on a beach. And she was old. She was elderly. And this is what her teeth looked like. Beautiful teeth. Good. What they look like in captivity. Look at this. This is Tilikum. How many of you know who Tilikum is? He's the whale that killed the trainer 5.5 years ago. That's his teeth. This is another whale at SeaWorld. These are both from SeaWorld. See the broken teeth? These are actually filed down to the gum line. This whale has broken teeth. The teeth in the back are normal, but the teeth in the front are broken. How did they get like that? Because the whales chew on the walls and the gates. They chew on their tank. They're bored. They are bored. They chew on the tank. It files down the teeth over time. They can get like this, well, they get like this pretty quickly. By the time they're 6 or 7 years old, if they're born in captivity, so they're very young animals, not even full-grown adults yet, their teeth look like this. By the time they're in their teens and 20s, they look like this. Now, not all of them. Lolita does not chew on her walls or her gates. Remember, she's been living in that little tank for 45 years. There's a reason she's still alive. One of them appears to be that she's not neurotic, believe it or not. Amazingly enough, she's not neurotic in that little tank, and she doesn't chew on her walls or her gates, and so her teeth are actually in very good shape. Most of them look like this, though, and some of them look like this because they're chewing on the walls. They're chewing on the gates. When asked why the teeth look like this, SeaWorld tells people, this is a public position they have, and it's on their website. They're told, people, the public is told, it's because this happens naturally when they manipulate objects in their environment, quote unquote. This is not natural, that's natural. They do in fact there's two populations we know of where their teeth wear down. Over a lifetime they'll get like this. It's because of the way they feed. They either feed on prey that's very rough skin, like shark feed. If you notice, there's no teeth right in the front. That's actually normal. There's no teeth right in the front. No teeth right in the front. There's no teeth right in the front. When they suction feed, they just take, they're just on a fish, they get to a fish and they just go. But think about all the water that rushes into the mouth when they do that. So if they feed that way on smaller fish and they just suck the fish in, over a lifetime, the water just wears away at the teeth, just like it does rock or a canyon. A river will wear away rock. They will wear their teeth down over a lifetime, but it's because of the way they feed. This is not from feeding, because remember, the fish just fall from the sky and they just, they never even touch their fish with their teeth or their mouths. It just drops right down into their gullet. Maybe they'll take them, a big fish right in the tip of their mouth, but they're not actually handling their prey, right? And so this is the result of just neurotic behavior. And in the wild, for those populations that have this problem, where shark feeding, it may be a health problem. By the time they're 40 or 50 and they have teeth like this, they might actually have poor health as well. Any bad teeth, this is true for human beings, it's true for your dog, it's true for your cat. If they have bad teeth, it's a health problem. Any vet will tell you that. Bad dental health can lead to bad overall health, infections, and so on. So this is a very serious problem. Now I'm just going to finish up. I have a few minutes left. I'm going to talk about capture from the wild. So in the United States, 22 years now, because of public pressure, it's still perfectly legal in the United States to capture whales and dolphins from the wild under our law. But you have to get a permit, and that permit is public. That permit application process is public. So if you apply for a permit, we will all know about it, and we will put a lot of pressure on you, and so nobody's tried it in 22 years. Canada doesn't export wild-caught belugas anymore, so nobody has gone there. This is where everything is happening these days. The Solomon Islands no longer allows the capture of bottlenose dolphins. It ended just a couple of years ago. They were allowing it all the way up until about 2012, and now they don't. The dry fisheries, how many of you know about those? The dry fisheries in Taiji. Okay. Very violent, very stressful method of capture. That's a very common source of dolphins. The 7 dolphins at Ocean Park are from the Taiji captures. Cuba still allows captures, and that market is mostly Europe or the rest of the Caribbean. And then Russia. Russia has just started capturing belugas for a very long time. This was a capture in Japan in 1997. It was the last time any other country but Russia caught orcas. By 2008, so only 11 years after this, the 5 whales, the 5 young whales that were caught in this capture, all of these whales were very young when they were caught. They were all dead. This is an animal that can live as long as we do. Orcas can live as long as we do. And in 11 years, these young whales that were caught in Japan, I'm not saying they all died in 2008. That was when the last of the 5 died. Prior to that, several died after only a few months or a couple of years. One of them lived 11 years and died then. So this is a very bad record. How do you kill 5 young whales in only 11 years? Stress, trauma. The captures in Russia, though, are growing and are of grave concern to us. So whales in Kamchatka, and they failed. Both of the whales that they tried to catch died. So in 2012, they went to the Sea of Okhotsk, which is on the same coast, the far east of Russia, but farther south. So they went to the Sea of Okhotsk and they caught 1 female in 2012, 7 whales in 2013, 2 more in 2014, and these are the ones we know about. It could have been more. We believe that there's anywhere from 13 to 16, I say 13 here, but we believe there could have been as many as 16 caught in the last few years. So these 13 are the ones I know about, but there may have been 3 more caught in any of these years. These are a population about which we know very little. Researchers haven't really studied them. So they're removing 13 to 16 whales from a population that might only number 100 animals or 150 animals. That's 10% if it's 150 animals. That is not a... This is the captures of belugas. So again, the 3 whales that are at the National Museum were caught in these captures in Russia. We know of many of them are going to China, mainland China. So you can see it involves nets, it involves a rope that's put around their tail, it involves being held in these very small holding pens, these temporary holding pens. It's a very stressful, traumatic event. These are very young animals, and they're being taken from their families, their social group. Traumatic, no matter how you look at it. This is actually not controversial. The science on the trauma that these animals experience during capture is in scientific literature. And yet it's allowed. It's considered acceptable. From a welfare perspective alone, it should not be acceptable. And I feel very strongly that the public display community, the zoos and aquariums themselves, should consider it unacceptable from a welfare perspective alone. Even if you thought this was sustainable, the removal of 20 belugas a year from a population about which we know very little, these are data that come from the Russians themselves. Even if you thought that was sustainable, which it isn't, it's not humane. And so we as the animal welfare community don't like it, but the zoo community shouldn't like it either. This is how they're held while they're waiting for sale. I mean, to me this looks like a goldfish bowl at a pet store. These are mammals, intelligent mammals. They're held like, and they're also children. They're intelligent children. And they're just in these little tanks where the public can sort of watch them until they have a seller. Until the seller has a buyer, Until they have a buyer. That's just not humane. Look at that. They're just on top of each other. It's ridiculous. In fact, this facility, or if you want to call it that, it's basically just a fish pen. This pen was in Vladivostok in 2006. It's been moved 40 kilometers away to a village called Nakotka because the ice formed over the top of this tank during the winter. Ice. And they got all bloody and cut up. And that upset the public. And when they came to look at them, oh, they're all bleeding. So they moved them away to 40 kilometers away just to keep them out of the public eye. So this is the only data I can show you about longevity. So bottlenose dolphins, these are studied, a lot of these studies are very old now. This is the mortality rate you'll see in captivity. This is the mortality rate we see in Florida, in a population that's very well studied in Florida. So this is not, still see, it's not as good as the wild. So they die at a slightly higher rate than they do in the wild. This is probably improved. This is old data. This is probably improved, but nobody's put it into the peer-reviewed literature. So I'm still waiting for a scientific paper in the peer-reviewed literature to demonstrate that these numbers have improved. Orcas, this is the mortality rate you'll see in captivity. You'll see that this number is quite high. This is the most recent. This is the most recent analysis. And in the wild, they are very, very robust. They don't have a very high, and that's because, remember I told you, top marine predator. You know, nothing kills an orca. Certainly not once it's an adult. So belugas we know less about in the wild, and so we're not quite sure what their mortality rate is in the wild, but we do know what it is in captivity. Looking at teeth rings, tooth rings are like the tree, rings in a tree. You can section the tooth and actually tell how old the animal is. So looking at an animal whose tooth has been pulled or who is dead, you can see that it looks like their lifespans are halved in captivity. They live about half maximum as they do in the wild. Now this is the most recent research. This is from this year, 2015. A paper that was just published shows that in the wild, survival to sexual maturity and to menopause, orcas experience menopause. Females survive beyond the reproductive lifespan. They have value as old ladies. Right? So grandmas have value. They can't reproduce anymore, but they survive because they have value. So to those two life stages, we have a very high, but in captivity, much fewer, many fewer animals get to that life stage. So that's one study. And then another study found that the survivorship rates in captivity, in fact specifically at SeaWorld, are only as good as an endangered population in the wild and a threatened population in the wild. So they were saying, this is how they interpreted these researchers. They said, SeaWorld's whales live as long as whales did. Except when you look at those wild whales, you find out that one of them is endangered, one population is endangered, and one is threatened. So another way of looking at it is SeaWorld as a habitat is degraded in the same way that threatened and endangered populations' habitat is degraded. That's not very impressive, right? So there's a book, by the way, that, as I told you, this is an earlier version. I meant to have a different version. This is Tillicum, right? This is pretty much his life looking at the surface. There's a book called Death at SeaWorld. I don't think it's been translated into Chinese yet, but if you can read English, I really recommend you read it. It has all of the details of this issue when it comes to killer whales. There's several documentaries, Blackfish being the most obvious one, if you've seen that. And also this Born to be Free is a Russian documentary that depicts the trade in the belugas and the orcas that are coming out of the Sea of Okhotsk. So this is an extremely important documentary, and it may be Russia's blackfish. We hope it is Russia's blackfish. A former trainer at SeaWorld has written a book this year, he just published it, called Beneath the Surface. So that's the end. The two pictures of the sea pens, unfortunately, aren't going to be on this one. So, sorry about that. I have just 5 minutes for questions, so if anybody has any questions. Thank you.
Hello. May I ask, how can we stop Japan and catch dolphins?
Well, that's a very good question. Basically, Japan and the Japanese people are going to have to want to stop this hunt. As outsiders, it's very difficult for us to influence their decisions. In fact, they feel the more outside pressure they get, the more they want to continue the hunt. So we've actually probably had some negative effect on the possibility of it ending. So I think we need to just continue to encourage local Japanese keep pressuring their government, so it has to come from the inside. Continue to educate the public. A lot of Japanese members of the public do not know about the code. They're actually unaware of the code. So continuing to do outreach to the public and educating the consumers in Japan. So those are things we want to do, but putting pressure on the government has been, I think, counterproductive. So we need to be careful about not making them feel defensive and digging in their heels, as we say in English, to actually continue the hunt just because outsiders are trying to tell them what to do. We need to be very careful. No, the numbers are going down. We are having an effect. It's just not as fast as we might like.
我想请问那个 Dr.Naomi 关于那个他刚刚有讲到说海豚不会没事，如果前面有障碍，其实说海豚它如何知道前面有障碍物，是透过视力还是透过声呐的探索？如果是透过声呐的探索的话，那我就很好奇说，当它被圈养在那个水池里面的时候，它不断的发出声呐，不断的被这些水泥挡回来的时候，这个不断的穷其他一辈子可能好几年、十几年，这样对于它的这个声呐的系统，对它的听力会不会产生一个什么样的影响？
I think they can definitely tell there is a wall there from using their echolocation. Know that there's a barrier. They can see it as well. They have very good vision. The question is, why don't they jump over it? I don't think, especially in a sea pen, they know there's water on the other side. They can see the water through the net, and they can echolocate on the net and know there's water. So really, why don't they just jump over the net? And again, I think it's just because in their hardwiring, a barrier is not something they even consider. As every once in a while you'll get an innovative dolphin, a brave dolphin, a bold dolphin, who will in fact jump over. And they escape. And this has happened before, but it's very rare. Most of them just stay inside the barrier without any trouble for the facility at all. They just don't know they can jump over it. Their echolocation in captivity is perfectly functional. They can use it, there's no problem. They just don't, because the tank is the same every day. The pen is the same every day. It's very unvaried. Nothing changes day after day after day. So why use your echolocation? It's a very sophisticated method to detect your environment. Just use your eyes. It's the same every day.
想请问那个 Dr. Ross， 就是有没有关于是鲸豚在空气里面的一些听力的一些研究？因为有很多争议是关于表演或是圈养的时候，来自于就是一般播放的音乐或是观众的喧闹声对鲸豚的影响，虽然在于水下，对，但是空气中他们一样可以接收到 trainer 的哨音或者是其他的声音的来源。
Both their vision and their hearing above water is almost as good as it is below water. They have excellent hearing in air, very good hearing, amazing hearing underwater. They have perfectly good vision in air and perfectly good vision underwater. So when their heads are above the water, they can hear everything perfectly well. And it is in fact a problem. Now, underwater, the sound going through the air, they can't hear in-air sounds very well when they're underwater. As soon as their heads come up above the water, they hear it perfectly well. So when the music is really, really loud, and they're at station, and their heads are up, they can hear that. And it's a problem. I actually believe that a lot of whales and dolphins in captivity have had some hearing loss because of the noise.
我想请问一下博士哦，就是台湾有3个地方是有在圈养就是海豚哺乳之后，那台湾的目前这3个地方的那个圈养环境大概是什么样的情况，或者说有什么样的问题，会提供什么样的建议吗？
I am in fact putting together some of my thoughts for Croatia and East in a report. And I, in fact, answered your question in that report. My general impression is that there's a lot of potential here in Taiwan to phase out the display of whales and dolphins. It will take a lot from the facilities with the NGOs, but I think there's a lot of potential here for a mutually beneficial future. And I'm really encouraging the 3 facilities here in Taiwan to consider a dialogue with the NGOs to talk about this potential future. So my general impression is the facilities here are pretty typical. They're just like facilities everywhere else. And I think that a couple of them have very good mammal exhibits because they have other exhibits and other attractions that are very good. So I encourage the industry here to dialogue with the NGOs.
那我自己问过，就是说一般的这个市民的话，大概超过90%的人他们的对于鲸豚的第一次接触的经验都来自于 SeaWorld 那样，就连我自己也是。那我觉得 SeaWorld 基本上它其实做的是一个 public entertainment， not public education 这样。那我想问，就是你有没有觉得，不管在哪里的 SeaWorld， 美国或者说在台湾，有没有哪个地方可以 maintain 到就是说一个很好的就是public entertainment 跟 public education 之间的平衡。
I think that most people who get their first and only exposure to these animals from facilities, dolphinary entertainment facilities, it's a problem because they are misinformed about the biology, left with the wrong impression about their biology, about their conservation status, about their abilities, because they are just exposed to a caricature, to a clown, to a performer. And I actually think it's a problem. It's actually actively a problem how people get their education from these facilities. I think that there is absolutely potential for some of these places to do a more educational show. I've seen these shows in other places where they get rid of the circus, the music, talk about the amazing abilities of these animals, and they demonstrate the amazing ability of these animals in these quieter demonstrations. So I've seen a good show that is actually educational. It is also less entertaining. So a lot of these facilities are not willing to consider it. And then there's the argument that if in fact we make the show better, maybe it becomes acceptable to keep them in captivity. And I am very strong about making that clear, that all I'm talking about is improving their welfare and improving the edging out their exhibit. Because it could take some time. These animals can live 20, 30, 40 years. But I want it to be phased out. I mean for the end point to be no cetaceans in captivity. So when I talk about improving their welfare or improving the show, all I'm talking about is this transition period where we no longer have captive whales and dolphins 20, 30, 40 years from now. Whether they are put into a sanctuary, whether they are left where they are, we can do things, but we can never make it right. We can make it better, but we can't make it good. And so let's end it, but we can make things better while we end it. It's not going to happen overnight. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight.
鲸豚圈养的争议里面有3个层面，一个是表演，一个是圈养，第3个是繁殖。那涉及到表演，当然大多数都不会赞成。而圈养跟繁殖会涉及到一个科学研究的问题。那么 Dr. Rose 怎么看这个科学研究跟圈养鲸豚的圈养？这里面有没有必然的关系？是不是一定要有圈养，很多的研究才能进行？
There are several facilities around the world that have captive cetaceans purely for research purposes. And in fact, most of the facilities that have these animals for research going on. So the argument that we need them in dolphinariums, that we need them in entertainment facilities for research is actually pretty weak, because in many cases, the animals are not available for research. Okay? And in fact, I'm not the one who's saying that. The captive researchers are saying that. They often complain that they don't have access to animals in dolphinariums for their research. The show interferes with the research schedule. They're so busy being trained for the performance that they are not available for research. So activity in dolphinariums for research is very weak. Do we need them at all in captivity for research? Well, if we were transitioning them out of captivity over 20, 30, 40 years, it would certainly be available for research during that time. Beyond that, there will always be animals that strand and cannot be released back into the wild because of some condition, and those animals would always be available for research. One of the facilities I just mentioned that is not an entertainment dolphinarium for research is the Clearwater Marine Aquarium. Those dolphins, there's 3 of them, were stranded, rescued, rehabilitated, and could not be returned to the wild. So they are held permanently in captivity and are available for research. So I think there will always be dolphins and whales like that. So we will never have, globally, we'll never have no whales or dolphins available for research in captivity. There'll always be some place that has some whales and dolphins available for research. I absolutely do not think we need dolphinariums. We do not need entertainment. Now, they're not available for that as much as you think they are.
Okay, the lady in purple shirt, please.
Not working. Is it working?
It's working.
Or we can actually fade out animal captivity, like captivity, the wild dolphins. Are there any way to systematically assess the welfare of captive cetaceans at the moment?
Yes. I offered a matrix of measures that we could use to assess the welfare of captive cetaceans. For example, are they at a good weight? Are their eyes open and clear? Are they active? Are they doing stereotyped behaviors? and so on. It's a whole matrix of characteristics or measures that can be used to assess the welfare of captive cetaceans. It was adapted from livestock, a matrix that veterinarians use to assess the welfare of cows and pigs and horses, and adapted it for dolphins. So it's an established series of measures that work for other species but have been specifically adapted for dolphins. This paper was just published in the journal Animal Welfare this year, and I think it's a very good series of measures that can be used by anybody experienced with the animals. It doesn't have to be a veterinarian, but it would need to be somebody who understands what the animals are about, a biologist or something like that. And they would need to use these measures, from the audience. You need to be able to get right up close and actually be with the animals. And so the facilities would have to cooperate. So, but nevertheless, there is a matrix, a set of assessments that can be used.
Okay, so do you have the name of the paper?
Yes, I can give that name to you afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
我想请问博士关于医疗的问题，像我们知道死了7只，那每一次他们的死亡，海参馆都会对外说，比方说是细菌感染啊，然后引起这个肺部衰竭死亡。像刚刚博士刚秀的那个牙齿的那个影片，我想我们公众如何知道说这些鲸豚最后其实可能他们其实很痛苦死亡的？那我们如何在圈养环境里面对这么大型的兽知道它各种疾病会造成它什么样的身心状况，它的痛苦程度，那甚至什么时候可能无法医治的时候，公众可以要求说应该要尽早让他们安乐死，死亡。所以关于圈养鲸豚的疾病的死亡的研究，我想知道现在世界各国的状况。
The most common cause of death in these animals is, in fact, pneumonia or other infections, septicemia, other infections. Euthanasia is actually very rarely required because usually by the time one of these animals exhibits signs of illness, it's very close to death. And it will die fairly quickly after it shows any signs of illness at all. In a couple of instances, the animal has been ill for some time. It has been used a couple of times to literally put an animal out of its misery. But it is in fact not very common because the whale or the dolphin dies before that decision can even be made. So by the time a whale, this is very common for wildlife in general. It's not just unique to whales and dolphins. They hide their illnesses. My cat hid his cancer for months. I had no idea he was sick. This is very common for animals. It's not a good thing to show your weakness in the wild. You get eaten by somebody, right? So you hide your illness. And because when you think about it, it's not like they wag their tail or they have a wet nose or they do anything. Their ears are up or down. These are ways we can tell our dog is sick or our dog is unhappy. And a lot of terrestrial wildlife have similar tells, similar signs that they're ill. How can you tell a dolphin is ill? It doesn't do any of those things. We find it very difficult to read them. So as long as they're eating, we think they're fine. And that's usually the first sign that something's wrong. They stop eating. And that's when you go, oh gosh, let's do some blood work. Let's check to see what's wrong. 8 hours later, they're dead. That's a very common pattern. And so it isn't always the way it works, but it's very common. And so euthanasia usually never even comes into it because they're dead before they even make that decision.
Okay, we're taking the last 2 questions.
博士你好，我想请问，像有些地区它以大型海洋动物为指标性动物，比如像冲绳的海参馆，它可能以保育为名去圈养鲸鲨。 那如果我们要禁止这样的圈养活动，但是跟当地的观光的发展有所冲突的时候，是以什么样的例？有没有同样的案例能够与我们分享？谢谢。
One of the things I tell the public very often is that if these animals weren't available in captivity, we would come up with other ways of understanding them. People can care about animals without an argument that the zoo and aquarium industry often offers that you have to be able to see the animal to care about the animal. You have to be able to interact with the animal to care about the animal and then work to protect it in the wild. And if that's true, one, a lot of animals are doomed to extinction because they're not in zoos or aquariums. So I hope that's not true. And in fact, it is not true because there are a lot of species that people are very invested in and care a great deal about and are not in captivity. Just as an example, humpback whales. Humpback whales are not in captivity, but a lot of people love them and care about them and work to protect them. Children about an animal they will never see, dinosaurs. Every young child thinks dinosaurs are the best thing. I hope they've never seen a live one, because if they have, oh my gosh, we're in trouble. All right, so we can teach children, we can get people to care without seeing a live animal. We know that. So for animals, for species where the welfare is compromised so tremendously by being in captivity, let's just make the societal decision not to maintain those animals in captivity and come up with more innovative, more technology-based about those species. And for example, there's a new technology where it's a hologram of a humpback whale coming right up out of the floor, right? Reaching right up out of the floor. And the way I saw it was in a gymnasium at a school. It's the most amazing thing. This humpback whale just comes right up out of the gymnasium floor and breaches and lands. And the kids all go, ooh, ah. They're in the gym and they've just seen a humpback whale. All right, so we do not need to put these animals into captivity to teach children or to teach the public about their biology. And there's a new study out where they did a survey of visitors to dolphinariums and people who did not go to the dolphinariums. So they got a big enough sample size that they had dolphinarium visitors and non-dolphinarium visitors. And what they found out was that dolphinarium visitors had less concern about the conservation of whales and dolphins than the non-dolphinarium visitors. Because when you go to a dolphinarium and that's how you see your dolphins and whales, you become anesthetized to the dangers facing them, because if they were threatened in the wild, how do the tricks? There must not be a problem. It would be illegal to have them in captivity and performing if they were endangered or threatened. So this is actually a problem if you got them in an entertainment facility. People learn the wrong thing.
Okay, I think because we ran out of time, so this will be the end of this session. And let's keep on the dialogue to improve the welfare of captive dolphins from now on. And we have more discussion time after 5 p.m., which is an open discussion. If you have, let us know at that time. And we'll have a break for 10 minutes and enjoy the snack, beverage, gift shop upstairs. And of course, thank you for paying attention to the donation boxes.
谢谢Dr.Naomi还有伟丽哈，那我们也是刚刚伟丽说的，大家下一场演讲在40分的时候会开始，10点40分。 所以大约还有5到8分钟的时间，大家可以去上面走走，吃点东西。还有因为刚刚有一些比较晚到的朋友如果你的包包有一个收纳区的话，就可以协助放过去。那有更多的空位可以让刚迟到的朋友加入我们。还有如果还有想要问的问题，可以在楼上的报到处有空白的纸张，那里是提问单。可以写在上面。我们最后的一个活动在3点40，最后的综合讨论的时候，我们会收集大家的提问单，这样子，然后可以一并的回答给大家。好，谢谢。
对啊。海参牌录啊。
你不打卡吗？
我们来那个之前玩的。
好朋友来，周先生。
4点多出门。
节目到底讲什么？有，我有接台。
对，还是不要带来一点多数的安全。
这个是黑潮的。
好，那我赶快赶一赶。
看你怎么带呀？不是初三才会带这样。
你去东山有带那么多？
没有啊，我都会带小。
哦，对，就没有在那里。
对，大的话一个电池就1公斤哎。
因为我根本没看过东西很多。
不然这一包我看一般超重的。
对，没有。
你是安怎啊？你笑看你是安怎啊？
你在中面上这个完全都不要了解。对啊，完全看不懂。然后用一下那个你自己可以更多人可以用。
然后这中间这一些大前面
我还在看一个来自希腊，
真难讲。来自希腊的花样。然后这个篦罗我也是不知道什么意思，然后后来也有一个说要
哎，反正就是边打字很快，然后又打字不顺。
没想到他们还蛮坚持的。我都没有管他，会觉得蛮奇妙的。黑潮的都是，然后我刚以为还蛮好奇，不知道他为什么。反正如果太夸张，我就觉得。
谁比现在标准这样的？
就要去看，所以他刚刚应该是做出来，这个右边这个旁边就是开始当做第一排，
在你开始前，我们
希望给大家看看。
不然那个光跟你们吃都没用。
对啊，
不要再问我这种问题，不打瞌睡吗？我也不想，我也不想。晚上对，我是一直想拼的，我都一直有调味的，想要拼起来，都一直拼。我还有吃糖，我都吃了没有用。这样吧。哇，你看得懂？他们在打什么猫？有来闹场的，可我还蛮好奇他们在说什么。
我是有应该可以为什么要去巴西？
我也不知道，他是来乱的。
真的是来乱吗？那是谁？
有吗？对啊，
对，不是
你是穿有些西装。
你看懂这个？因为我看不懂这些。
来乱的。
对，来乱。
你有权利删掉吗？
有可以删掉，就是
删了。
是啊，这是什么意思？ 他们后来有。
Okay, you ready?
管他啦。
后面还有然后什么巴西啊、希腊。
不要管他，删了。
Okay, just test it. Does that work for you? Is that good? I need to speak louder. No?
我觉得你可以考虑在对，然后还盖板，盖板可能比较简单，是那么大，而且住3年就可以申请。对呀。如果他有什么要多少钱，拿来的话，你去每个要去参加的都先缴保证金，然后累积到能够，然后就在这边，然后就涨。有啊，你们今年前任就只有给他查那个身份证，如果给我们把你们全都收了，对对，我一想到就这样。要看那个基金，都是大家跟同事们借钱，然后那个再买。没有还这门槛的问题，只是这门槛的问题。我上注册下就有注册，用好单词。
小放在出去，狗它贴出来说它已经满了，然后我们都没有报名。对啊。不是，我是说明年东家。哦，完全，我完全。
然后还有一些朋友还在楼上哈，那我们先开始，已经请他们陆续的往楼下移动了。下一场演讲呢，主题是海捕动物圈养议题还有研究。那我们邀请到江水也在楼上，有看到，邀请到一直在持续在改善动物福利的亚洲动物基金会动物福利主任David Neale，还有主持人不是，我只是提一下。台大生态演化所的周连香教授啊，那我现在把麦克风交给周教授。
大家早安啊！看到大家那么踊跃，非常高兴。
现在我要介绍一位非常特别的来宾。这位来宾呢，他过去他的人生阶段至少有2个阶段。前面一个阶段呢，他致力于集水区的研究跟保育。集水区大家都知道非常的重要，而且我们台湾过去没有水的问题，最近台风集水区，他必须跟地方的 community、地方的社，还有一些政府组织打交道，所以他经验很丰富。怎么样沟通很重要。那么在大约是他的硕士论文是完成这个阶段之后，做了2年相关的事情，然后转换跑道到了动物福利在动物福利这个组织里面尤其是针对于亚洲的动物福利基金会，那么这10几年来都在这边工作。那今天他要来给我们分享非常精彩的研究，就是海捕动物圈养议题及研究。Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcome David Neale.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the organisers for hosting this conference and for inviting me to come along and talk to you about some of the captivity issues. Firstly, just a very brief introduction to Animals Asia Foundation. The majority of our work is actually based in China and in Vietnam, and I'm also going to talk about a little bit about our work with cetaceans in Indonesia. And the majority of our work is actually involved with bears rather than with marine mammals. So we operate bear rescue centres and have agreements with the Chinese and the Vietnamese government to close the bear farms for the bears to be released to our sanctuaries. Gradually over the past few years, we've started to get much more active with regards to the captivity issues in both China and Vietnam and across other Asian countries, particularly with regards to the zoos. So the land animals within the zoos, but more recently into looking at some of the issues with regards to cetaceans in captivity. I'm actually going to split my talk into 3 sections. We were hoping for a speaker to be here from the Whale and Dolphin Conservation, and so the first part of my talk is actually me delivering ending the keeping of whales and dolphins in captivity in the European Union. So the Whale and Dolphin Conservation Organisation is based in the UK and campaigns almost totally for an end to the keeping of whales and dolphins within the European Union. Also does some international work as well. The second part of the talk will look specifically at the situation as it is within the United Kingdom, which is where I'm from, and we'll look at how the industry has gone from a very productive industry many years ago to no whales and dolphins in captivity in the UK. And then the third part, I'll bring it back to Asia and talk a little bit more about my work, the situation as it is now in Indonesia. Okay, so there are the 3 parts. That was a bit impressive for me. So first of all, I'm just going to look at the ending of the keeping of whales and dolphins in captivity in the European Union. And as I say, this is mainly work which is being done through the Whale and Dolphin Conservation Organisation. So just to give a little bit of background, there are 32 facilities within the European Union which are holding whales and dolphins in captivity for display to the public. Basically, it's made up of a number of different countries. So there are 28 member states within the European Union. So the member state is a country. So all of those countries come underneath this umbrella, which is called the European Union. So the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, France, Spain, etc., etc. All of these are member states of the European Union. Between all of these facilities, they hold an estimated 309 captive cetaceans, so whales, dolphins and porpoises. And bottlenose dolphins are the most popular species. As Naomi has already said, this is common globally. But there are orcas and there are some harbour porpoises within facilities within the European Union. And all of the dolphin area within the European Union operates subject to the requirements of the European Union Zoos Directive and subject to the requirements of the national legislation which is implemented within their country, which has to implement that directive. So the European Union come up with an overarching directive with some conditions that every single country then has to bring into their own legislation for them to implement on the ground. And there are 15 member states, 15 countries within the European Union which act on dolphins and porpoises. So which means there are actually 13 countries within the European Union that do not have any wild cetaceans in captivity. So, similar to the situation in other parts of the world, we find that the highest number of these facilities are where the tourists are, so particularly within the Mediterranean countries, within Spain and France, etc., where there are a high number of visitors, both from European visitors and international visitors from outside of Europe, and these are the countries which are holding. Almost all of the facilities display dolphins to the public by way of these very loud circus-style shows in these purpose-built stadiums, which you saw from some of the slides from Naomi. And while the European Union Zoos Directive requires a commitment by the facilities to come towards to meet certain conditions for conservation and education, the primary focus of all of these displays remains that of entertainment. So in order to test the extent of the commitment towards the directive within the European Union, the Whale and Dolphin Conservation carried out and then on the individual dolphinariums' compliance with the European Union Zoos Directive. So one of the measures within the directive is that all institutions, all facilities holding whales and dolphins must have a conservation aspect to them. So the directive requires dolphinariums to implement conservation measures such as participating in research from which then conservation benefits can accrue to the species in the wild, or exchanging information on species conservation between different facilities and internationally, and where appropriate, carrying out captive breeding and exchanging that information as a way to from needing to capture more individuals from the wild, and also looking at the possible reintroduction of species back into the wild. The study by Whale and Dolphin Conservation actually found that there was very little research that was being carried out that had any benefit towards conservation, and limited information being provided about any of the work that the facilities were involved within in the public. So very little information on their website, very little information about conservation on their public materials that they gave out to their visitors. And they also provided very little contribution to things like the European Cetacean Society. So they're providing very little useful information with regard to conservation. Second area which the study looked at was captive breeding and reintroduction, and the births and the deaths of cetaceans within the European Union are not formally being published by the industry, so therefore it's very difficult for Whale and Dolphin Conservation to evaluate the success of captive breeding in the facilities which are holding whales and dolphins within the European Union. And concerns have then been raised about the captive population not actually being self-sustaining, which then obviously may lead to more proposals for the import of wild-caught individuals from outside of the European Union. Under the European Union CITES law, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, so the imports of wild-caught cetaceans are prohibited for purely commercial purposes. But imports have occurred in the past under this guise of education and conservation, which is what the directive says the institution should actually be carrying out. But the study is basically showing that these institutions are not carrying out much conservation education work. And furthermore, although momentum is growing for the return of captive dolphins to the wild within the public momentum at least, or for the establishment of the rest of their lives within a more natural environment, there isn't any facility within the European Union which actually involved in any reintroduction programs for the whales and dolphins that it holds. The European Union Zoos Directive also requires dolphinary to promote public awareness and education. But again, the Whale and Dolphin Conservation Society's study found that the dolphinary primarily present whales and dolphins to the public in the form of entertainment shows, as we were just discussing. And these entertainment shows are having very little educational messages attached to them. So very little education about the threats that whale and dolphins face in the wild, etc. And they're really only demonstrating some of the more unnatural behaviours and these choreographed behaviours which are being trained for the purposes of entertainment. Or many of them are also offering interaction, close contact interaction between the cetaceans and the members of the public. So either photo opportunities or the possibility for people to swim with the dolphins, where again, to be argued, there is little to no conservation or educational benefit to these particular interactions. So some of the behaviours which are observed are typical of the shows globally. Basketballs into a basketball ring, dolphins which are towing children around in these small inflatable boats, etc. In some cases, dolphins giving paintbrushes so they can paint on a canvas is quite popular, or doing the usual kind of jumping through. So these are standard entertainment within what we see globally, very much in operation within the European Union. And then looking at the welfare, the well-being of the animals within captivity, the European Union Zoos Directive requires that all dolphinaria accommodate whales and dolphins under biological conservation requirements of the individual species. Now, again, without going into it in too much detail, Naomi's already explained some of the major problems of keeping these individuals in captivity with regards managing their welfare. Whales and dolphins are obviously incredibly intelligent animals, very far-ranging individuals who hunt and live in often very complex social groups, and none of this is being replicated within the environments which are being kept within the European Union. So again, it's failing to meet this aim of the European Union Zoos Directive to keep animals according to their biological requirements. And individuals who may well be put together, again causing aggressive interactions, causing animals to be living in a state of stress. And what we start to see then is some of these stereotypical behaviours becoming very common. And also, as already Naomi has told us, we also then start to see these common causes of diseases and animals not surviving so well in captivity as they would do in the wild. Things like pneumonia, bacterial infections, etc. So the study basically concluded that the facilities holding whales and dolphins in captivity in the European Union and the member state governments of the individual countries' requirements of the Zoos Directive. So the institutions are failing to meet the legal requirements of keeping whales and dolphins in captivity. So the study then produced a number of recommendations which are recommendations both for the European Commission. Now, without getting into the technicals of how Europe works, the European Commission is really the highest body which can actually drive legislation. So after the European Commission, it really then just goes to a final individual European Council, which are the decision makers. So the European Commission is one of the highest bodies which actually so the recommendations to the Commission from this study are that they must ensure full implementation of this directive, which is responsible for, which is the zoos directive, which therefore means that they must encourage or work with the member states to make sure that the facilities are meeting the natural behaviour, the conditions which meet the natural behaviours of these animals, the conservation goals, the education goals, etc. It was also recommended that the European Commission establish this European Union-wide inventory of dolphin area with public access. So again, so that every institution could be scrutinised, we could see whether there was breeding, institutions were bringing any individuals in from the wild, but also look towards, as a recommendation, to ban the import of any more wild-caught dolphins. And again, very much on the basis of what Naomi was talking about earlier, from both a welfare and potentially a conservation aspect. The Whale and Dolphin Conservation Study also had some individual recommendations to the member states. These are the individual countries, so the 15 countries which hold whales and dolphins in captivity. And the first one, obviously, to ensure full implementation of the national zoo legislation. So all of these rules, the law which is here, is put into this national zoo legislation to implement it. And obviously from the study, the member states aren't implementing it. So the recommendation is firstly to look towards full implementation. And then to implement strict national standards, which obviously try and then, individual countries can go above and beyond the directive. They don't have to sit here. This is just a minimum that they have to meet. So in all of the directives which come out of the European Union, which go, regardless of what it is, whether it involves animals or not, the countries, it's a minimum for the countries to meet. So ideally, the countries would go above and beyond that minimum to provide even better standards. The member states and the institutions that they hold were encouraged to prohibit the contact between the visitors and the dolphins, phase out plans, so a phase out of national dolphin area, but also then prohibiting any new development. So there's an application for a new facility, encouraging the member states not to accept that application, and then to look towards working with the dolphin area to either retire or to release these animals. Since 2011, when the report was published, these findings have now been presented to the European Commission, so there's a very formal process of presenting these findings, working with members of the European Parliament, which are these elected members, which represent each individual country, can then take this information to the people in the European Commission. And there has since then been a series, what it has revealed is that there is very little will and a lack of resources to actually address this from the European Union side. So although the evidence is there that the facilities are not meeting the very directive which was set by the European Commission and the individual member states' legislation, there still appears to be very little will to actually take any action. Members of the European Parliament can then push that as far as they can go by asking these parliamentary questions within the European Parliament and trying to get the Commission to take responsibility. But the response from the Commission is that the responsibility lies with the individual member states. And this is quite a in that although the Commission is setting the guidelines, setting the rules, they're not actually taking responsibility for the implementation. The implementation is then the responsibility of the individual countries. And so it's a little bit of passing the buck backwards and forwards going on here. What we have seen, some good news, although there are already 13 countries without any cetaceans in captivity. And more recently, we've seen Croatia, Cyprus, and Slovenia actually implement national legislation to prevent, so that there won't be any development of these facilities. Hungary has banned the import of dolphins, and along with Switzerland. So gradually we're beginning to see under action. And we're starting to see some individual facilities closing down. There's been some recent closures in Germany and Italy, and just recently, Finland, which just has one dolphin area, has announced that this facility will be closing down. So gradually, we're starting to see more and more countries taking responsibility and more countries becoming free of whales and dolphins in captivity. Since 2011, the Whale and Dolphin Conservation have now set up this new NGO, non-governmental organisation, this new coalition of groups, which is called the Dolphin Area Free Europe. And this has been established to address these emerging on the European Union, on the European Commission, and working with the likes of this Environment Committee, which is one of the parliamentary committees, which can then have further discussions with the European Commission. So there's very much a political process which is very active within the European Union, and the organisations or the animal welfare organisations are coming together to speak as one voice, which is incredibly important to make sure that that one voice is asking for exactly the same thing, and then going to the European Parliament and going to the European Commission to say, look, this is something that the public now want, and trying to get the implementation of that legislation. And Whale and Dolphin Conservation are also working on a sanctuary project for captive bottlenose dolphins to be in the Mediterranean, and they hope to have announce more news about that soon. So that would at least then give them, or give the facilities an option, so which at the moment doesn't exist, or it's very difficult if a facility is looking to potentially close down, if there isn't an option for where those animals to go. In many cases those animals may then be passed on to another facility, which is of course better than nothing, but it'd be great if there was actually a facility which could at least show that some of these animals could potentially be rehabilitated back to the wild, or at least live a life in a sanctuary which would improve their welfare. Okay, so that's the second part of this talk. I want to just concentrate on the United Kingdom, where I'm from, and in a sanctuary which would decline of the captivity industry within the United Kingdom. We're very proud in the United Kingdom to say that the second part of this talk, I want to just concentrate on the United Kingdom, where I at least live a life in a sanctuary. So, some of the first facilities are here. So that's we're very proud in the United Kingdom. So the second part of this talk, I want to just concentrate on the United Kingdom, where I at least live a life in a sanctuary. So, marine mammals and dolphins. Some of the first facilities are here. So that's I'm very proud in the United Kingdom. By the 1970s, the number of these facilities were now over 300 dolphins and the number of orcas. So you can see that it's been tried really in the early 60s into the 70s, where this was incredibly popular. A lot of big changes to cover, and therefore people were investing very much people were investing a lot of money in this facility and getting a lot of animals. So on the early 60s, where there were very few animals, we suddenly had 300 dolphins by the end of the 70s. And by the mid-1970s, then there are travelling dolphin shows within the UK. Travelling dolphin shows, I'm going to talk a little bit about those in a moment, because we also have them in Indonesia. But as I'm sure you can imagine, they create even greater welfare problems for the animals due to the nature of them having to be regularly moved. However, the last dolphinarium, which was this one in Flamingo Land, actually closed its doors in 1993. So there was a process that happened between the mid-1970s or the late 60s, 70s to 1993. So it's sort of a 30-year period where the industry went this way, where we were getting more and more facilities, more and more captive dolphins and whales, and station shows, the keeping of them in captivity, which was obviously once considered an acceptable form of entertainment, ceased to exist in the UK. Well, it's like everything. How do we create change on all of the issues that we're working with? One of the major drivers is this, public awareness, changing the public perception of what actually happens to these animals. So the effects of captivity, the welfare implications of captivity, which were by no way as well understood as they are today, but there was still enough information to convince the public that this was wrong. So looking at the cetaceans, their biology, their physiology, etc., people started to grow much more aware of the issues and start to question what we're doing here today. Exactly the process which is happening in this room right now was happening back in the 70s within the UK. There started to be some moral and some ethical issues raised, whether it was morally right for us to actually keep these wide-ranging social species within these conditions. There was also this growing realization of the intelligence of species. There started to be some moral and some ethical issues raised, whether it was morally cognitive ability for us to actually keep these wide-ranging social species within these conditions. The question we started. There was also this growing realization of the intelligence of species. There's some question as to the ethical issues raised, whether it was morally cognitive for us to actually keep these wide-ranging social species within these conditions. There was also whether the growing realization of the intelligence of species. There's some question as to the ethical issues raised, whether it was morally cognitive for us to actually keep these wide-ranging social species within these conditions. There was also whether the growing realization of the intelligence of species. There's some question as to the ethical issues raised, whether it was morally cognitive. Change people's perspectives on whatever issue it is. In this time, it was keeping us staged in captivity. What it generally feels like, and it may well feel like to people in here and other countries in Asia, is you're a lone voice. And I'm sure many of these people here felt they were probably quite a lone voice back in the 60s and the 70s when the support of seeing these facilities advertised on the television, people are talking about going to them, how wonderful it is to see these animals, and you're the one who's standing up saying, actually I think this is wrong. It's quite it can be a demoralizing position to put yourself in, but the strength of knowing that you're actually in the right position means that in many cases you come through and you start to see that change. And what it did do, because of this, it actually ended up leading to a change in the UK legislation. So by 1985, the pressure on these facilities had grown. There was public pressure, which was then putting political pressure on the government to actually do something about these facilities and prevent them from continuing to expand. And the Department of Environment, Oscar and Susan Brown, to undertake this review of all the dolphin area within the UK. And then this report was then published and accepted by the government, and it later actually became a supplement to the government's standards of modern zoo practices. And this then eventually was translated into legislation in 1993. And what did this do? Well, it meant that the recommendation, rather than the United Kingdom banning the keeping of whales and dolphins in captivity or banning the import of animals, etc., it really just set the standards higher than the facilities could meet. So recommendations were set in pool sizes for bottlenose dolphins with depths of 5.6 metres. Things like facilities had to ensure that animals were kept of mixed gender, so that not just female groups, male and female, etc. And these regulations there was no option to them. The facilities either had to comply, so they had to invest to improve their facilities, or they had to close down. And they had a very big impact, because by 1986, just after the review had been done, there were only 4 facilities now left. So there's Morecambe Marine Land, Brighton Dolphinarium, Windsor Safari Park, which is not specifically just a dolphinarium, it's a larger safari park that has a dolphinarium within it, and the original one, Flamingo Land. By 1991, then substantial investment was going to be made by the implementation of 1993 to upgrade their facilities and the pools that they were holding their dolphins if they were to meet the new conditions. Windsor Safari Park had a particular problem because it was now the only facility that still held captive orcas, and they would have had to have made very significant changes to be able to meet the conditions of the new legislation. And this was an orca called Winnie. They were also being faced by fall in attendance, so the public awareness had shifted now, and the public's support for keeping whales and dolphins in captivity had started to disappear. So therefore, it just didn't make any economic sense for Windsor Safari Park to invest in a new facility. And in 1991 was returned to SeaWorld Orlando. SeaWorld Orlando had actually originally captured her from Iceland, and then she ended up at Windsor Safari Park. And so Windsor Safari Park now only had dolphins. And then for some time, campaigns, as we said before, had existed where people were protesting, and these continued. So the protests continued outside of the facilities, and gradually this brought on the support of the national media, and in particular the Daily Mail, which is a very well-read national newspaper within the UK. And this took on a campaign called Into the Blue. So by this time, the industry had pretty much disappeared, but there was still these in Morecambe and Missy and Silver, and these became the focus of a media campaign, a national media campaign by this newspaper to force these institutions to do something about these individual animals. And this gained a huge amount of public support and obviously raised the further awareness of the issues. And in 1991, both Morecambe and Brighton both closed, and Rocky, followed then by Missy and Silver, were transferred to a holding area reserve in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and were later released back into the wild. So this was very much again driven by the general public and by getting the media behind the public to actually get something done about these facilities. The dolphins, even though they didn't have the orcas anymore, but because of the public opinion, because people were now staying away from these facilities, then this went into receivership. So they basically just couldn't operate anymore. They were running at a major financial loss, and the dolphins were relocated to a dolphinarium in the Netherlands. And finally, Flamingo Land, which was one of the original facilities within the UK, eventually bowed to the pressure, and in 1993 their dolphins were transferred to the Kolmården Zoo in Sweden. And this meant that this was the closure of the last remaining facility, and therefore came the end of keeping of cetaceans in captivity in the UK. So from 1993 we've never had a cetacean. It's a combination of protesting, a combination of lobbying, and gaining the government support, but much more importantly, the public support to actually drive this process and lead to this demise of the UK industry. However, in principle, it's not illegal. So we can't say that it's illegal to hold whales and dolphins in captivity. In principle, any individual could put in an application to the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK to open up a facility for dolphins or whales, just like they may put in an application for a facility for a normal zoo or a safari park. So we have to remain vigilant. So one of the organisations that has been working on this is an organisation called Marine Connection with this department here, which is the government department which would have responsibility for giving a licence if one was to be asked for. And so far they're being assured that if there was any application, if any application was forthcoming, then it would not be looked upon favourably. So even if an application was made which was showing that it could meet the requirements of the national legislation, that it could meet the requirements of the European directive, then the assurance from the government is that they wouldn't allow that to happen. They wouldn't give the go-ahead for that to happen. And that again comes from the fact that the public in the United Kingdom are largely against this. And it certainly isn't 100%, but it's largely against the keeping of whales and dolphins in captivity. So that for now, the chance of history actually, but obviously we have to remain vigilant. Times change, individuals change. If this issue was to go out of the public's eye, then the situation could change quite rapidly. But I believe from living in the UK myself, now that it would be very difficult for an institution to open up a facility within the UK. So that's the situation in the European Union and the specific situation of how the UK changed over a 30-year period from 36 dolphinariums to 0. And then the last part of my talk, I want to concentrate on, bring it back to Asia, because I work for Animals Asia Foundation, so our work is mainly focused here in Asia and innovation within Indonesia. So if you've got questions about the European Union, the UK, please hold them to the end, and I'll just talk a little bit about something slightly different with the situation for captive dolphins in Indonesia. So very briefly, the dolphins are being technically held illegally within Indonesia. They're being caught from the Java Sea, and these are mainly being caught by fishermen. Now, we believe that the fishermen are catching the dolphins by order rather than just through entanglement within fishing nets. And we believe that there is an association between the captive facilities that hold these individuals and the fishermen. In fact, we've seen quite a bit of order rather than just being part of an entanglement. In order to avoid the existing law, which prohibits the capture of dolphins for the captivity industry within Indonesia, then the fishermen are claiming these animals are being entangled. So that it's a claim that the animals need rescue. So the animal becomes entangled in a fishing net, and therefore it then gets brought into captivity. When these animals come in, they're taken to this place. The majority of them are taken by this organisation, the Worsutsuguni Indonesia, and this is one of their holding pens for the dolphins which have been brought out from the sea by the fishermen. Now taken to this facility for treatment, and the forestry department then provide a temporary permit for the facility to keep the dolphin until the point that the dolphin is healthy and can be released back into the wild. Now to date, not one single dolphin has been released back into the wild in Indonesia through this process. And I've seen many of these dolphins that look to me that like they physically could be released back into the wild. So these aren't individuals which are incredibly ill, incredibly sick. These are individuals which look, without actually carrying out any welfare assessment, which look like they are relatively healthy individuals. In 2009, how much you know about Indonesia, but Taman Safari is the big name for safari parks in Indonesia. Taman Safari own 3 very large safari parks across Indonesia for land animals, so tigers, bears, elephant, rhino, etc. And they are the name within Indonesia for captive wildlife. Taman Safari in 2009 also opened their own dolphin centre. So this says to me that even though the government says that people aren't allowed to capture dolphins from the wild, there's obviously an industry here, and Taman Safari are the ones that are going to capitalise on this. So they opened up their own dolphin centre to receive rescued dolphins, to receive dolphins which were in need of rescue from the fishermen. This is their facility in Batang, and these are the government officials which are there showing members of the public the dolphins. And so there's evidence to suggest that this industry is being supported by the forestry department. So the forestry departments, particularly those within Java and those within Bali, where the majority of these animals are, appear to be providing support for the industry. December 2012, 3 dolphins have been captured, registered as being rescued, given a temporary permit, and are now involved in the travelling circus operation operated by these facilities. And this, again, is very well known by the forestry departments. They're the ones providing to keep these animals. So the travelling circuses, and you remember I mentioned travelling circuses. The UK used to have travelling circuses. I believe this is the only ones that we're aware of globally. I don't know whether that is actually true. The only ones that I'm aware of globally is that Indonesia is the only country that still has travelling circuses. Worsat Indonesia operate 3 of these travelling circuses, and they rotate all around, mainly on the island of Java. And these are, as you can imagine, you'll see the size of the pools in a moment, but they generally have 2 dolphins, and then they'll have a series of other animals. So they have otters here, and here the usual sort of circus on young sun bear, which is doing these ridiculous bike riding tricks, etc. And then they have a bird performance as well. Taman Safari also started up their own travelling circus operation quite recently, and they operate 2 travelling circuses. So there are around about 5 travelling circuses operating throughout Indonesia now. And this is the Taman Safari one, the Pentas Lumba Lumba. This is the facility for the dolphins. So this is, you imagine, this is a temporary facility for the dolphins, and they will spend around about 6 weeks in this facility in one place before then the whole operation will pack up and move to another facility. And every now and then the WSI has a permanent centre, the Taman Safari has their permanent centre, and the dolphins get rotated, so they get moved back to the centre, and other dolphins will be brought to the travelling circus. The dolphins are being confined in what, as you can see, very small, but what are highly chlorinated pools. They're being subjected to this incredibly loud music. I've been to these circuses a number of times, and it is unbelievable, the noise. And obviously, this noise starts very early on. Travelling circuses try to attract people last minute to come to their circus by noise. So the noise starts maybe half an hour before the performance starts, to try to bring in people from the surrounding area to say, look, the circus is starting, let's go and see it. These may be operating 6 times a day. So there's a lot of performance in, a lot of noise that these individuals are being subjected to. Actually, in 2008, one of the dolphins died during a show. So there was actual death during a show, which has put pressure, at least, on these travelling circuses to try to close them down. In January 2012, the circuses were investigated by the national TV, the Trans TV. So journalists started to pay an interest in this, and they looked at the chlorine levels in the pools. So they took some water samples, and they found that they were 8 times, so they're very high levels. And I don't know whether you can see here, but this was just from 2 weeks ago. This this dolphin here has an ulcerated eye. And this is at the Taman Safari facility. Now Taman Safari, and I know the owners of Taman Safari quite well, I have good dialogue with them, and they claim to be one of the best conservation facilities within Indonesia. Taman Safari Indonesia is a member of the World Zoo Association, so in theory they are vetted on an international level. So a whole other presentation in that, to whether that's a working scheme or not. But this institution is putting itself out as one of the best institutions for conservation within Indonesia, and also as one. Yet clearly there's a dolphin with an ulcerated eye which is being performing. Now I can't say exactly why that eye is ulcerated. Maybe that dolphin came in with an ulcerated eye from the wild, maybe it didn't, but there's clearly a problem here which is not being addressed. The types of tricks are pretty normal for the travelling circus, so they have a general setup with these rings which come down from the top, and the dolphins are jumping through the rings, balancing basketballs while they swim upside down, and the interactions as well. So at the end of the show, they're asked to interact with the public, or the public can pay to have their photographs taken. And this is generally the way that they're being transported. So this is a box here, and then but you can imagine every 6 weeks these animals are being loaded onto a truck and transported. And if you just think about the time it must take to break down that facility, so it's not just like maybe the travelling circus is moving 10 miles, 20 kilometres, 30 kilometres away. When you think of the time it must take, because the dolphins must be one of the first animals to get loaded, because they have to drain the pool. And then they have to take that, so the dolphin gets loaded onto a facility here, drains the pool down, and then that whole process has to start, and then the whole process has to be rebuilt at the other end. So I don't have the data, but I suspect these dolphins are spending a lot of long hours in this type of facility. And the dolphin is a protected species under the. In theory, anybody violating this law should be punished. Yet we still see that no protected animal is in theory being allowed to be kept unless it's for research or for rescue. And the commercial institutions are obviously continuing to exploit this reason to use this fallacy of rescue. So the fishermen will say, oh yeah, we've got a dolphin which is sick, it's in need of rescue, it's in need of treatment, and then the commercial institution can take it. By law, anyone who wants to capture a dolphin from the wild actually needs to get a permit from both Indonesian scientific authorities, the forestry department, etc. Again, this is not happening. The permits are being applied for after the animal has arrived, and they're temporary holding permits. We have a permanent holding permit to keep these animals. They're just temporary. On the basis of the temporary, they should be assessed and the animals released. But again, none of this is happening. It's very unlikely that so many dolphins are obviously being entangled in the fishermen's nets, yet these dolphins continue to arrive. To avoid this problem, the fisheries department has actually set up a national protocol on strandings, on the handling of marine mammals during strandings. And it basically exempts the commercial institutions from being involved, and it basically says that when an individual is found stranded or in need of some treatment, then everything possible should be done to try to release the animal back. The fisheries department have accepted that the chances of survival for many of those individuals is greater in the wild than it probably is in captivity. But unfortunately, the fisheries department doesn't manage dolphins in Indonesia. All the commercial centres that protect wildlife within Indonesia are obliged to tag the animals. It's a simple thing. Every animal is tagged so that the government know how many animals they have, where they are, when animals are bred, etc. But none of the dolphins are being tagged. And again, this is because they're on temporary permits. So the forestry department doesn't have any control over the movement of these animals, doesn't have the records to say when these animals are coming into captivity, when these animals are dying. So again, there's a system there which is broken down. And there should be a system to actually know where all these animals are and how many there are, yet that is not happening. Jakarta Animal Aid Network, which is the organisation based on the ground in Indonesia, are suggesting that there may be around 70 captive dolphins within the country. Now, the campaign to end the industry within Indonesia has been very much driven by Jakarta Animal Aid Network. And in March 2010, they actually got an agreement to rescue and to rehabilitate some of these dolphins. So push the Indonesian Forestry Authority to say, you have a responsibility, these are temporary holding permits for the dolphins, they should be looking towards going back into the wild. And the forestry agreed, and they set up a memorandum of understanding with Jakarta Animal Aid Network, which basically said that Jakarta Animal Aid Network could be released back into the wild. And they've done it. They set up a sea pen. So working with the Earth Island Institute from the United States, they built this sea pen, and it's ready right now to receive dolphins, which could potentially then be rehabilitated back into the wild. It was ready from 2011, and we're in 2015, and not one single dolphin has been confiscated for this sea pen. In fact, in March 2011, there was a scheduled confiscation. So Taman Safari, it wasn't these particular dolphins, I don't think, but Taman Safari had two relatively recently rescued dolphins, and the forestry department, working with Jakarta Animal Aid Network, said that they would rescue facility. And it was actually on the day of the operation. So the Jakarta Animal Aid Network had everything ready. They had marine mammal vets, experts flown into the country. They had all the transport facilities. They had the coastal police ready for when they got to the site so that these animals could be taken out and escorted to the sea pen. Everything was ready, and the forestry department didn't turn up. So the forestry department, on the very day that they said they would turn up and the forestry department were needed to do the confiscation, didn't turn up. And the situation pretty much changed overnight. So it went from looking like it was supportive towards them to starting at least to confiscate some of these animals, starting to release, and it changed, and the forestry department had developed the Dolphin Owners Coalition. And there are some pretty powerful people within Indonesia who are running these facilities, had obviously put a lot of pressure, a lot of political pressure onto the forestry department, and they had a change of direction. And therefore, Jakarta Animal Aid Network, the NGO which was already all set to start to take these animals, were a member of this Dolphin Owners Coalition. They were brought in to the Dolphin Owners Coalition, but to actually confiscate any animal now required the support of all members of the Dolphin Owners Coalition. So obviously that was set up to prevent this process from happening, because the dolphin owners do not want to lose the dolphins. So that's where that process stalled. And that's how it's been since. And what we're now seeing in Indonesia is a growth in dolphin tourism. So this is a facility in Bali, which is, you basically get a boat out to this facility, and then there's about 12 of these holding pens, each with 2 dolphins in, and then tourists can interact with the dolphins and get them to do these tricks. And then obviously having the photographs taken with the dolphins is one of the main things. And this is incredibly popular, especially during the tourist season, and it's growing as well. This facility has been in the international press in the last few months. This is called the Bali Wake facility. Again, it's quite typical of a number of facilities. This is just next to here is just a restaurant. There's a hotel at the back, and this is basically a swimming pool. And there are 4 dolphins which are in this facility. And here's the scene, almost looking out to the environment where they've come from, but obviously having no way of actually getting there. And this one has come under a lot of pressure because of an Australian surfer who took some photos at this facility, took that back and raised public awareness. And I never know how these things happen, but every now and then the public seems to get behind a certain campaign. This one, he put a petition online, it received over 500,000 over 500,000 people signed it to say they wanted to see a closure of this facility. I've worked with the government department that's responsible for this. There is no way they're closing this facility down. The facility has the support of the government, and because it's raising a lot of money. And unfortunately, it brings in a lot of tourists, and they're not all Indonesian tourists. There are a lot of Western tourists which are visiting in this facility. Rampant trade in dolphins, which is likely to obviously potentially having an impact on the wild population within Indonesia. All the dolphins being held in captivity, it can be argued are being held illegally because in theory they should be released back to the wild. And it demonstrates the unwillingness of the forestry department to actually tackle this problem. Permits are being provided by the forestry department so that these businesses can exploit this loophole so they can hold these individuals on temporary holding permits, again with not one individual that's actually been released back into the wild. In many cases the dolphins are being held, well in all cases the dolphins are being held in unacceptable conditions. Many cases are worse than others, particularly some of the swimming pools as well. Pool size maybe just 1.5 meters deep, obviously off chlorinated water, etc. So very poor management leading to welfare problems. It has international support. The IUCN, the World Conservation Union, has actually written to the Indonesian government asking them to halt the ongoing exploitation and uphold the Memorandum of Understanding to rehabilitate captive dolphins. So it's not just an internal NGO issue, it's an international issue which has support to be tackled. And the ongoing captures of dolphins continues, and it continues to be ignored and, I feel, supported by the government. And therefore, urgent action is needed to try to close this legal loophole and to try to secure the release of some of these individuals. And the forestry department has failed to protect marine mammals from exploitation. Instead, the regional offices appear to be profiting by allowing these commercial industries. And this is actually despite a clear instruction from the forestry minister back in 2013, relevant just to the travelling shows, that these shows were closed down. The forestry minister actually said in 2013 that he wanted to see an end to travelling shows. There's been a huge amount of international pressure. Indonesia does listen to international pressure, and he wanted to see a closure. Yet the people within the government are strong enough, and the Dolphin Owners Coalition are strong enough to not allow that to happen, even after the minister, it's no longer the minister, but the minister of 2013 actually made a public statement that the dolphin travelling shows should close down, which has meant the rehabilitation centre remains empty. It remains ready. The Jakarta Animal Aid Network continue to maintain it. It's ready to receive dolphins, yet not a single dolphin has been given to them for potential for release. Of dolphins in Indonesia, these steps are needed. Firstly, a nationwide inventory of all the dolphins in captivity, tagging of the individuals so they can be monitored over a period of time so we can see when these animals are dying, if new animals are coming into the institutions. A closure of this legal loophole, which is allowing the commercial facilities to have these rescued animals, and then the confiscation of the animals to the sea pen. But ideally, and I think this potentially is crucial, the management of marine animals, marine mammals, to be placed under the remit, in this case, of the fisheries, because the forestry is certainly not taking the necessary action, whereas the fisheries department have actually appeared to show some concern for this issue with regards to trying to develop that national stranding protocol. Just the very foundations, and this cynically is probably an attempt to try to show that they do have a concern for the welfare of the animals. Article 43 of this government regulation says that the animals, the institution must meet the biological needs of the animal. And what we're trying to do now is to get the Indonesian government and the forestry department to define what animal welfare is, because it doesn't take an animal welfare expert to know that these animals, their biological needs are not being met, particularly within the travelling circuses, but also in many of the other institutions. And Article 44 of the government regulations states that any facility must display natural behaviours. And then it lists a whole bunch of natural behaviours, which include having these hoops on the rostrum. I mean, it's nonsensical, is the nicest way of putting it, I think, in that the government regulations are actually listing natural behaviours which are clearly unnatural behaviours. So this gives us an opportunity from a legislative standpoint to actually go to the government and say, one, you're not meeting up to conditions of none of these facilities are meeting the conditions of Article 44, and none of the facilities are meeting the conditions of Article 43, which is to provide for the welfare of the animals. But ultimately, like everywhere, it will come down to the change in these people's opinion. Almost all of the times I've been there, then it's been a packed house. They are still incredibly popular. The tourism side of things is mainly international with the dolphin facility in Jakarta, and the travelling circuses are very much Indonesian, and they're very much full of Indonesian people wanting to see dolphins in captivity. So again, looking back at the situation in the UK, maybe the government will act following an increase in public awareness. It's a slow burner, it's a slow process, but it's an essential process that we have to go through within Indonesia to change the public's opinion so that the government do take the necessary action and release, or at least prevent any more animals coming into captivity. So there's a lot of information in there in a lot of different countries. Thank you very much for listening.
So we will have plenty of time for questions.
Mention about dolphin. I'd like to ask what taking photos cause health. Because I see dolphins in Australia, they stand on the dolphin's back.
The public is standing on the dolphin's back?
No, the trainer.
Not that matter.
It doesn't matter?
No, I just mean, do you mean that the public, the trainers are standing on the dolphin's back?
The trainer stands on the dolphin's back, and the photo you showed us, that tourists is taking photos with dolphins. Would that cause a health problem to dolphin because they might feel stressful or something?
Certainly, yes, for sure. I think certainly in a number of these facilities you see animals or being pushed through the water with the animals. I'm sure that can cause them some physical stress for certain individuals. And yes, I believe that there'll be a serious amount of stress involved for animals within that public interaction that they have. Some people would say, in some cases dolphins do interact with people in the wild. The difference is they have a choice. In here they have no choice. So in these facilities then they're being put into a very unnatural situation of having 4, 5, 6, 7 people in the water, and they're being brought into that situation by being provided with food. So the animal's presumably hungry, knows it can get food from that situation, and it's having to then deal with all of this interaction. And in some cases people are actually almost picking the dolphins up out of the water, which is going to cause
Hello， 我想请问一下，就是刚刚我们听到了说你对于英国以及亚洲的一些境况的描述， 那我想注意到的是，英国从当初1960年代到完全根除这个展示行为，花了将近30年的时间。那你认为亚洲面对这样的情况，与当初英国花的时间相比，会有什么差异？那其中面临的困境又有什么不同？
Okay, not an easy question to answer because there's so many different countries which are holding cetaceans here within Asia, from Taiwan. So this is, I have a little bit of experience within China and Vietnam and Indonesia, but I see facilities here which we're in a good position now to start to work with facilities here to maybe try to transition away from keeping whales and dolphins in captivity and working with people within the industry to try to find a solution to this issue. Within the UK situation still took 30-something years, and it may well be the same in many other countries. I'm not going to comment on the situation in China because there's a talk about that later. I know somebody who's been doing a lot of research on the China situation, which is possibly one of the biggest growing industries, countries with the growing industry, so we'll probably get a little bit more information from there. I work a little bit in Vietnam, and we're at the very start of that process in Vietnam. Already we may be behind the curve, so to speak, in that dolphins have already started to come into facilities in Vietnam. The Vietnamese economy is growing quite rapidly. I think it's one of the fastest growing economies in Asia, similar to Indonesia, so it's kind of following Indonesia. And again, I don't have the information, but I suspect this is a common theme. Economic development comes, then people have disposable income, so therefore they have these facilities start setting up for entertainment. Indonesia's already going through that process. Vietnam appears to be starting that process. So there are dolphins in a number of zoo facilities in Vietnam. We've just learned of a potential new facility in the city of Da Nang, which is a very popular tourism city within Vietnam. And so now we're trying to get ahead of that and work with the authorities to try to convince them not to open up. So, potentially it's a short-term gain for them economically, but the likelihood is there'll be an impact in terms of the international impact and the pressure that will come to bear on them from opening up one of these facilities. So it's difficult to sort of put it across the whole of Asia, but I'd like to think that it won't take as long as 30 odd years, but then you look to America, and Naomi's much better, would have much more information than I have, and the campaign is taking many years because there is still public support for these institutions. So we're in a good position in some countries where we're starting to put out that public awareness and we're starting to learn maybe lessons from what's happened in other countries. But we're also chasing after the industry in many other Asian countries.
如果他是从那个庇护所里面，你们怎么会去决定说他是应该进入庇护所，或是他可以进行研发？那如果他是先进到庇护所之后，有没有可能他是在里面一段时间之后评估完之后，然后会做研发？那如果会进行评估的话，又是会进行哪些工作？
The Whale and Dolphin Conservation Organisation are currently looking at setting up a sanctuary. So there isn't actually a facility available at the moment, which I think when we are approaching institutions with dolphins, then we have an option for those dolphins to be moved into a facility. But that facility, as far as I'm aware, is still being developed. But once that's developed, then I suppose it will come down to individual contact with those facilities. And it really will come down to whether the facilities want to either sell their animals to another facility or they want to be involved in the process of trying to rehabilitate and put those animals potentially back into the wild. So every institution will have their own plan for those animals, I suspect. Some of them may want to get some money from them, and so by closing down, they may sell them to the highest bidder, which then means they could end up anywhere. Whereas others, we hope, would take a more moral approach to rescue and rehabilitate. But then it would also come down to the individuals and whether they have the ability to be rehabilitated, and that would obviously have to be through an assessment process to whether they actually are capable of re-releasing to the wild, or maybe they're kept within a facility, similar to what Naomi said. In many cases, it would be better to keep them in a sea facility where they maybe live out the rest of their lives in that facility, but not actually having to do shows and public interactions, and they're in a more natural environment. So that will come down to those individuals.
谢谢 F 的报告。我想英国是在动保议题应该是很先进。那英国的动保团体在国际的动保运动也应该是算是最活跃的。但是英国人，他虽然在英国没有这些或者他在去泰国参加那个大象的那个骑大象的活动，所以是不是其实还是有很多英国人在英国他没有这一类的，不支持这一类的活动，但是他到了其他国家，特别是像东南亚的话，他们还是会参加。所以英国的动保团体对这个部分是不是有注意，或者是采取一些什么行动？
It's a good point. It's certainly, although the United Kingdom doesn't have any dolphins or whales in captivity, we still have people and tour operators operating out of the United Kingdom selling holidays, trips to various facilities, whether that be in America, whether it be in Europe, etc., whether it be in Bali. So there is still some demand for people to go and see these facilities. And the crazy thing is, I suspect some of these people wouldn't accept was to develop, yet would still happily go to another country and for some reason see that as being an acceptable thing to be involved in. So we still have a long way to go from a public awareness point of view. We have to keep up that pressure to make sure that people are aware of the issues within the UK. There's a very active conservation, animal welfare community within the United Kingdom, links in internationally. And actually, Naomi made the point just after her talk that the United Kingdom is actually a very good example to show that we don't need whales and dolphins in captivity for people to respect and want to be involved in the conservation of these species. Because the majority of people in the UK do not go to these facilities internationally, yet there is still, UK has one of the greatest number of people donating to whale and dolphin conservation projects. So it shows that to the wild populations, to information about wild populations, and to help to conserve those wild populations without the interaction of seeing those animals for themselves. But we do have to address the tour companies and the individuals that are going abroad to be involved in these things as well. And that's something for all international NGOs, I think, to try to get a handle on where these hotspots are. Bali is a particular hotspot for international tourists. From what I've seen from being there, it's a lot of Australian tourists. There's a huge amount of awareness that needs to happen within Australia. Australia still has one facility where they have dolphins, so it's not been completely ended within that country. So that may be one of the reasons why there are a lot of people that see it as being acceptable. But there will surely still be people from the UK which are visiting these facilities as well. So we do have to keep on top of that, for sure.
你好，我想说，您对政府态度都是保持乐观，但是像台湾的话，它政府反而会刻意误导民众，比如像说从中华白海豚会转弯，就是可能为了利益的考量而去误导民众，这是我第一个问题。第二个问题是， 像延续刚刚泰国的问题，泰国现在有 Elephant Nature Park， 就是它是以救援伤象受伤的大象跟老象来当做一个招揽游客的一个目标。它的门票为2500元，可能50英镑吧。它比一般的来得高，可是它的入园的一个状况也是到最后也是跟大象拍照。那我在想，如果印尼要发展成这样子的保育公园，人道的再利用，这是我2个问题，谢谢。
Okay, we seem to be moving from cetaceans across to elephants here a little bit, but I also know a little bit about the situation with elephants in Asia as well. And it's different. I don't know this facility specifically. I don't know which one you're referring to, so I can't really comment on the suitability of them to actually have rescued elephants and what they do with the public. I do know that elephants in captivity is a major issue, and there are a number of facilities which are opening up as rescue centres for formerly elephants which were used in logging, or elephants which were used for riding. To digress a little bit, Animals Asia, we're actually actively involved in trying to develop a sanctuary in Vietnam for elephants, which are used for the public to ride within the central highlands of Vietnam, and we're working with the government to try to set up a sanctuary where people can come and see the elephants but not interact with them. So the idea being that we put them into social groups within this sanctuary where the public can actually observe the elephants from afar but not have that one-to-one interaction. The majority of the places in Thailand that have set up still have some kind of interaction with the elephants. Now, again, I'm not saying that it's difficult to transition straight away from that. I think with the that's not a situation which we'll see, particularly with whales and dolphins, in that there'll either be the ocean parks as they exist now, or the sanctuaries where people can come and see them. I don't think we'll start to get this mid-range where we're not too sure what to do that with dolphins. So I think we will, hopefully, we'll start to see animals go into proper sanctuaries. And a proper sanctuary to me is to care for those animals and meet as much of their natural behaviours as possible within those conditions. Ideally, obviously, a sanctuary then becomes a release centre for animals to be released back into the wild. And I think there's far greater options for cetaceans, obviously, to be released back into the wild. Many of them have been brought in from the wild than there is with something like elephants, where there isn't the habitat, and many of them have been in captivity for such a long time.
I actually have 2 questions for Dave. The first one is, UK is moving forward now with dolphinarium free. And then the next step is dolphinarium free. The ending dolphins in captivity is to load off some of the dolphins to other countries. For dolphinarium free Europe, in order to succeed, then there will be dolphins being transferred or dumped off to transferred to other area. Is there other alternative other than prolonging the situation and extend that to other countries? I'm sure other countries will be quite receptive for getting those dolphins. Would there be other alternatives, such as setting sanctuary for more release in the wild, or retire them in sea pen? The second question is related to Indonesia, probably through Asia. Mainly, it's quite obvious is the government corruption that lead to all this problem, because the owner of the dolphinarium work with the government. I understand that Animals Asia has been hugely successful to end all the bear farm, or not all, but a lot of bear farm in China and Vietnam, and those somewhat probably corrupted government as well. Can you draw any success story from working with those government in ending the bear farm in the dolphinarium situation?
Okay. Firstly, the Europe situation, then whale and dolphin conservation say that they are developing plans for a sanctuary. So I don't know what those plans are, but hopefully they appear, say from their talk, that they'll be releasing some plans very soon. So hopefully that will give an option for owners of dolphins to actually place their animals. I do suspect that if public opinion does continue to go against keeping dolphins in captivity, then some of them, but obviously it's a numbers game, and if it means that an institution gets an animal which they then don't need to capture another animal from the wild, then it's not great for those individuals obviously, but further down the line it does have an impact. So although that's relatively negative for those individuals, it's still a potential positive for the wider operation, trying to have less numbers within captivity. But yeah, the sanctuaries are very much something which is very much needed, I think, in Europe, so that there's an option. I don't quite know how to answer the one with regards to comparing the work that we've done in China and Vietnam with Indonesia. We haven't. Our work in Indonesia is quite low key. China and Vietnam, we went in very much with a backing of a lot of resources to set up sanctuaries, to build infrastructure, offer. We had quite a lot to offer those countries. And although we have numerous problems working with the governments, we still have agreements with the governments in China and agreements with the governments in Vietnam to rescue bears. The two situations are different because China still has legal bear farms, and Vietnam has all bear farming or extraction of whale is illegal. So we have a slightly different situation to work with. But we did have quite a lot to offer those governments in terms of resources and money to be able to set up these centres, and the international acclaim that they could then claim from that, or work with us from that to say, look what these countries are doing to try to tackle these issues. We don't have that type of resource to go into Indonesia, so our work in Indonesia has been much more low-key, just trying to meet with some of the government officials. Very fortunately, Animals Asia does have a good name, and meet with the Forestry Commission, the Forestry Department, a very high level, because of the Animals Asia name and because of the way that we've worked in China and Vietnam, which has been to try to include the governments in the process. So that has opened the door. It hasn't made the impact that we want, but then it's early days. So, we want to try to continue that dialogue and try to continue working with the organisations rather than completely against them. But it's a different situation because we're not offering a massive amount of resource to set up sea pens and resources, etc.
我想时间差不多了哈 ，Time is up, and we really appreciate Dave share us with the great information in the world, and also the good interaction between the question and the answer. So let's give him another applause again. Okay.
谢谢 David Neale 还有周连香教授。那用餐时间到了，在用餐之前几件事情，留一点时间给我哈。几件事情我先提醒一下。大家应该可以发现，我们这次的研讨会是没有提供2项东西。第一个就是纸本的讲义哈，所以大家在行前通知都应该有收到那个下载的点，就是我们一些所有的影片都是可以下载。那第二个没有提供的呢，就是一次性的大家可以发现，我们这次的研讨会是没有提供2项东西。第一个就是纸本的讲义，所以大家在行前通知都应该有收到。那等一下我们下载上会准备的一些事件都是可以下载的。那第二个没有提供的就是它一次性的上去，在大多用它这个大多这次的研讨会应该没有提供2项类的，但是呢还有要规范，所以大家在行前通知都应该要收到，可以放在桌上，或者有些事情上的提醒式的，在没有提供的就是它已经商务到大家它是够用的，快速的楼上可以用， 并没有惩罚大家的地方，这个都有。那这3个时间会在1年的时候结束，还有就是在楼上2楼的203教室有最佳播放的电商台面下小概50分钟，现在已经有播放，前面这几天的观众表现播放。如果想要去203教室看这个片的话，楼上设置给座位，可以单独就上去。那今天冬天的阳光这样子，观点不想在太阳，然后我们是在1点钟的时候20分回来。那另外还有一些事情就是，如果大家有要报告说有那个商场停车这样子的改动，不知道是哪个多少，但是应该有的。还有就是那个提问单哈，刚刚有还有想要发问的，上面报告说有这个是可以提出的条，有问题如果想有工作人员都可以。来最后多消息一下，所以刚才这个明年的，因为今年就是快年底了嘛，那大家刚刚研讨会比较会想要听明年的关于这个主题关注的一些计划。那楼上的地带区呢，我们有贩卖桌历，明年的桌历，所以当时会想要知道世界海洋日的时候，世界地球日什么时候，桌历上都有，在桌历上都有。而且黑潮年度的桌历都很爱以海洋为主题。好，所有的事情有各地。那5月3日可以开始到楼上，开始休息。那我们在1点的时候回到现场，谢谢。
对啊。